Chapter 4572. When Yetian heard Yu Sanjing say that the Fengtian sect's cultivation method originated from an ancient saint sovereign, he couldn't help but be shocked. Ancient saint sovereigns were the 9 strongest sages among the first batch of human sages during the ancient times. Ancient saint sovereigns were a special title that represented the strongest existence among humans during the ancient times. The true founder of the Fengtian sect wasn't the first Beacon Emperor, but the ancient saint sovereign who had fallen in the sky Beacon mountain range. The world Nyetian and the others had entered was the Fengtian sect's 9 extreme gates. One could boldly speculate that the ancient saint sovereign mentioned by Yu Sanjing was most likely the same ancient saint sovereign who had fallen in the Sky Phoenix sect. The chances of 2 ancient saint sovereigns appearing in the same place were too low. That's right. Yu Sanjing was taken aback. He didn't know why Nyetian and Qing Qi were so surprised. He continued, "Some people say that there used to be no people on the immortal Qi continent. It was the ancient holy venerate who came to this continent and gave birth to his descendants. That's how the immortal Qi continent became prosperous. It's no exaggeration to say that the ancient saint sovereign was the one who created the immortal Qi continent." Upon hearing Yu Sanjing's words, Nyetian and Qing Qi were once again dumbfounded and speechless. If what Yu Sanjing said was true, then the people on the immortal Qi continent were the descendants of the ancient saint sovereign. "Duke Yu, do you know how big the immortal Qi continent is?" Qing Qi asked curiously after calming down a little. They had come from the Fengtian sect, but that didn't mean the continent was small. It was likely that the Fengtian sect's 9 extreme gates was only one of the thousands of entrances to the immortal Qi continent. "I don't know." Yu Sanjing shook his head and smiled. "This old man has lived for more than 90 years, but I've never left Phoenix Morning Mountain." Nyetian frowned. Yu Sanjing didn't look like an old man in his 90s, but more like a man in his 50s or 60s. Although the All-Heaven Saints' world-revered strength, cultivators did not make up a large proportion of the population. It was only around a tenth at most. The remaining 9 out of 10 were ordinary people who did not cultivate martial arts. Their lifespans were between a few decades to 100 years old. Nyetian originally thought that Yu Sanjing was an ordinary person in his 50s or 60s. He didn't expect the latter to be in his 90s. However, the scenery here was picturesque, so it was normal for the people who lived here to live longer. However, when I was young, I visited the Fengtian sect once and was fortunate enough to hear the Fengtian immortal preach. According to the immortal sovereign, our immortal Qi continent is vast and boundless, without end. No one has ever reached the border of the immortal Qi continent. Yu Sanjing looked at Qing Qi. As if recalling the past, a fiery light surged in his eyes. Not long ago, he had once been hot-blooded and dreamed of becoming an immortal cultivator. However, because his fate in immortality was too shallow, he was rejected by the Fengtian sect in the end. "Sir Yu, how long do the cultivators of the Fengtian sect live?" Qing Qi frowned and asked with a smile. He had a vague guess in his mind. According to Yu Sanjing, the immortal Qi continent was a world of cultivation. The people of the immortal Qi continent were likely descendants of the ancient sacred sovereign, and the cultivation methods they cultivated were also passed down from the ancient sacred sovereign. All of this was very similar to the development of martial Dao in the sacred world. The martial Dao system of the sacred world had also been established in primeval times by the first batch of ancient sacred sovereigns. For example, the spirit realm, God realm, and sage realm weren't innate existences. Instead, the first batch of cultivators had discussed the characteristics of their martial Dao before finally deciding on them. Later on, cultivators would cultivate along this martial Dao system, resulting in the current world of martial Dao. Just like in the world Nyetian had come from, all cultivators strictly followed the 9 realms of origin meridians, origin spirits, then diviners, and then celestial emperors. But after coming to the sacred world, the people here only called the spirit realm the basic realm. The God realm was just a stage to expand one's strength, and the sage realm was the true beginning of martial Dao. Therefore, People in different worlds, different understandings, and different systems would lead to different achievements. Take Tian, for example. If he hadn't left the sacred world, he would have remained a peak celestial emperor for the rest of his life. Qi felt that martial Dao and immortal Dao were two different cultivation systems that had existed since primeval times. In the end, martial Dao prevailed in the sacred world, while immortal Dao was developed in the immortal Qi continent. The era of the ancient sacred sovereign had been a crucial period for the establishment of cultivation systems, so it wasn't strange for there to be many different cultivation systems at the same time. Qi really wanted to know how long the cultivators here had lived. The strength of a cultivation system was often directly proportional to one's lifespan. The longer one lived, the stronger one's cultivation system would be, and vice versa. At the end of the day, cultivation was to improve one's body. The stronger one's body was, the longer one's lifespan would be. Yu Sanjing was taken aback at first, as if he hadn't expected Qi to ask such a question. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "I don't know much about immortals, but I've heard that some powerful immortals can live for hundreds of years, and some can even live up to 1,000. 100 years, 1,000 years." Qi murmured with a smile. He understood many things now. Perhaps many cultivation systems existed in the all-heaven sacred world in the primordial era, but in the end, the system of martial arts with an absolute advantage emerged victorious. It lasted until now, becoming the current all-heaven sacred world. In Qi's opinion, the martial Dao system's popularity was directly related to its ability to extend a cultivator's lifespan. After all, most people wanted to live longer when they first started cultivating. The most obvious advantage of the martial Dao system over the immortal Dao system was the cultivator's lifespan. The immortal Dao system could at most extend a person's lifespan to 1,000 years, which was too little. Even if Yu Sanjing wasn't right, it was at most a few thousand years. 10,000 years was the limit. In the martial Dao system, cultivators at the basic realm could live up to 1,000 years, and those at the god realm could live up to 10,000 years. It was normal for sage realm cultivators to live up to a few 100,000 years, and some old monsters could even live up to a few million years. But even so, the martial Dao system wasn't free from the limitations of lifespan. Even the most powerful sacred ancestor had a limit to their lifespan. Although the martial Dao system was much stronger than the immortal Dao system in terms of lifespan, it didn't mean that cultivators were weaker than cultivators. There must be something special about the immortal Dao system for it to be spread and respected in the immortal Qi continent. Otherwise, the ancient sacred venerate wouldn't have needed to promote the immortal Dao system in the immortal Qi continent. He could have just used the martial Dao system. "Mr. Qi, you look like an immortal. You must be quite old." Yu Sanjing looked at Qi and smiled. "In my opinion, you should be around the same age as those immortals. You should be a few 100 years old, right?" Qi nodded with a smile, declining to comment. "Luer, so you're here." At that moment, a bright voice rang out. Then, a strong figure dashed in. In the face of the intruder, Tian narrowed his eyes slightly, and his expression changed involuntarily. He sensed a wave of power from the newcomer. It was a power that he'd never come into contact with before. Chapter 4573. Tian's expression changed when he saw the young man who had suddenly barged in. He sensed a mysterious power from the former that he had never encountered before. A cultivator. Qi's expression also changed at the same time, and he almost cried out. However, the young man did not notice the presence of Tian and Qi at all. His eyes were bright and passionate as he stared straight at Yulu. He seemed to be very happy. Yulu looked at the man in front of her and was also very happy, but she did not show it. She only smiled shyly and nodded. "Gao Yan, you've come at the right time. Let me introduce you to a few new friends." Yu Sanjing smiled, stood up, and introduced Tian and the others one by one. Gao Yan finally noticed Tian and the others. He nodded at them one by one, but he did not show much interest. Tian smiled faintly. Although Gao Yan was very polite on the surface, He could feel that the latter was an extremely arrogant person. His eyes, especially, always gave off a feeling of superiority. Sir Yu, I can see that Brother Gao Yin has an extraordinary temperament. Could he be a cultivator? The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched as he said with a smile. Ha! I didn't expect little brother Nie Tian to have such good eyesight. You can actually tell that Gao Yin is a cultivator at a glance. Yu Sanjing laughed heartily and seemed very proud. He said, Our Gaoyu village has 3 people who entered the Fengtian sect, and Gao Yin is one of them. So you're a cultivator from the Fengtian sect. My apologies. Nie Tian smiled and nodded at Gao Yin again. You're not from here? Gao Yin seemed even more arrogant. He glanced at Nie Tian and the others and asked. When his gaze fell on Mo Rushi, he paused for a moment, but then looked away. It was obvious that he was a little surprised by Mo Rushi's appearance, but he did not dare to show it too obviously because he was a cultivator. Exactly. Nie Tian nodded and saw the scene of Gao Yin looking at Mo Rushi. He felt a little disgusted, but he didn't flare up. Instead, he said, To tell you the truth, we have something to visit the Fengtian sect. May I ask Brother Gao Yin to introduce us? Why? Do you also want to join the Fengtian sect? Gao Yin smiled, his eyes filled with contempt. He had seen many people like Nie Tian. They were nothing more than idiots who dreamed of becoming immortals. How could they know that the path of cultivation was not something mortals could hope for? There were more than 10 million people in the world who wanted to cultivate, but those who could step onto the path of immortality were few and far between. Immortal cultivation not only required immortal roots, talent, and determination, but most importantly, immortal affinity. Without the immortal fate, even if you are a heaven-defying genius, you can only be immortal. The Fengtian sect was one of the 4 major immortal sects of the Xianxi continent. Its sect master, the Fengtian Immortal, was even revered as the Lord of Immortality. The Fengtian sect opened the opportunity of immortal affinity once every 10 years. Millions of people flocked to it, but only a few dozen could enter the sect in the end. Gaoyu village had a small population, but every time the opportunity opened, people could enter the Fengtian sect. This was not because the young people in Gaoyu village had good immortal roots, but because they were located on Fengming Mountain, so the Fengtian sect took great care of them. To Gao Yin, being born in Gaoyu village was his immortal affinity. Nie Tian and a few outsiders also wanted to enter the Fengtian sect. It was simply a fool's dream. Brother Gao, you misunderstood us. We are just visiting. We have no intention of joining the Fengtian sect. Nie Tian could naturally see the contempt in Gao Yan's eyes, but he didn't say anything and only responded indifferently. Oh, Gao Yan frowned, feeling that he was being looked down upon. His face darkened, and he said in a cold tone, Then may I ask, why do you want to visit the Fengtian sect? Nie Tian heard the sarcasm in Gao Yan's tone and said with a smile, It's a personal matter. It's not convenient to disclose. Gao Yan raised his eyebrows and said in a cold tone, Then I'm sorry, but other than the people of the Fengtian sect, outsiders who want to enter must apply for a visitation card. Then, can Brother Gao help us apply for a visitation card? Nie Tian's brows furrowed as he felt a stifling feeling in his heart. You and I are not related. Why should I apply for a visitation card for you? Gao Yan smiled cold and looked at Nie Tian as if he was watching a joke. Nie Tian's face darkened, and he didn't say anything else. Yu Sanjing, who was at the side, had an awkward expression and quickly said, Gao Yan, Brother Nie Tian is a martial cultivator. Maybe you could be friends. Martial cultivator? Gao Yan frowned. Only now did he realize that Nie Tian's appearance gave him a sense of déjà vu. His eyes couldn't help but tremble, and he seemed to be a little afraid. He then sneered and said, Is he the same as Devil's Knight? After Yu Sanjing's reminder, Gao Yan realized that Nie Tian was somewhat similar to Devil's Knight, who came to Gaoyu village not long ago. Judging from their age, they seemed to be brothers. Gao Yan didn't know that there were martial cultivators in this world other than immortal cultivators. He only knew what kind of people martial cultivators were after coming into contact with Devil's Knight. Moreover, martial cultivators gave him a great shock, especially the strength that Devil's Knight displayed. which far exceeded his expectations. Devil's Knight is my friend. Tian didn't have any scruples and said directly, "Friend?" Gao Yan's face immediately darkened, and a strange aura surged out from his body. He said cold, "Then I'd like to see how you compare to your friend." "Gao Yan, what are you doing?" Seeing this, Yu Sanjing's face immediately darkened, and he immediately shouted in a low voice. He didn't want to see Nie Tian and Gao Yan fight. "Didn't Sir Yu ask me to be friends with him?" Gao Yan didn't stop. He stared at Nie Tian and said cold, "In your place, this is called making friends through martial arts, isn't it?" Since Brother Gao is interested, Nie Tian wouldn't dare to spoil the mood. Nie Tian stood up with a smile on his lips. He spoke calmly, and his aura slowly rose, steadily suppressing Gao Yan. Third realm. Gao Yan felt the pressure from the void and couldn't help but take a few steps back. He couldn't help but exclaim. Nie Tian was stunned. He didn't quite understand what Gao Yan meant by third realm. "Do you dare to fight with me in the courtyard?" Gao Yan steadied his body and asked coldly without any hint of fear. "I'll fight you to the end." Nie Tian smiled faintly. He moved and arrived in the courtyard like a ray of light. At this moment, Nie Tian's expression changed. He felt strange. He felt that the structure of time here was different from the All Saints world. Vaguely, there seemed to be a force in the void that made him feel a sense of suppression. In fact, he already had this feeling when he faced the Fengtian sect's mountain gate formation yesterday, but he wasn't too sure. At this moment, he was truly sure that the structure of time in this world was indeed different. Perhaps this was why the people of the divine Qi continent cultivated immortality instead of martial arts. "Come!" At the same time, Gao Yan arrived at the courtyard and let out a grunt. His aura exploded and a mystical force was emitted, which transformed into a giant glowing figure outside of his body. It was solemn and holy, and emitted a powerful pressure. Chapter 4574. Nie Tian felt his aura stagnate, and his expression changed slightly. On the other hand, Gao Yan's aura surged unceasingly. His profound power flowed smoothly like floating clouds and flowing water, without the slightest pause. The dignified light projection around him was so vast and holy that Nie Tian felt a strong pressure from it. "Aya, what are you two doing? Don't hurt each other." Yu Sanjing's face paled at the sight of the two, and he quickly shouted. Qin Chi didn't have much of a reaction. He merely observed Gao Yan curiously in an attempt to find the source of his power and how he regulated his breathing. He wasn't worried about Nie Tian. Though he had no understanding of the immortal Tao, he believed in Nie Tian's strength. Are the breeze, 10,000 elephants' palm. However, Gao Yan didn't pay the slightest attention to Yu Sanjing. With a bellow, he pressed his palm down, and the glowing shadow around him launched a powerful attack towards Nie Tian with mountain-crushing momentum. Bang! Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as he unleashed his sword Qi, which pierced through the air and shattered the palm projection with a muffled sound. Gao Yan's expression changed as he exclaimed in surprise. He attacked again, this time with a horizontal slap. His eyes were vicious. Nie Tian, however, remained where he was. The sword Qi around him howled like a storm and broke through the attack in the air. This time, Gao Yan's body shook under the pressure of the sword Qi. He couldn't help but take a few steps back and almost fell to the ground. Gao Yan steadied himself. He was both shocked and angry. He didn't expect Nie Tian to be so strong. "What about me?" Nie Tian's lips twitched. His face was full of mockery. Gao Yan had always been arrogant because of his identity as an immortal cultivator. Nie Tian had long since grown tired of him. Since Gao Yan asked for a friendly duel, Nie Tian could use this opportunity to teach him a lesson. "You've angered me." Gao Yan's eyes sank and surged with killing intent that was difficult to conceal. If it was said that he just wanted to suppress Nie Tian and vent his anger, then now he had already made up his mind to kill Nie Tian. Anger just like that? It seems that I have overestimated the temperament of immortal cultivators. Nie Tian could naturally sense the other party's killing intent, but he smiled faintly and didn't care in the slightest. In the eyes of an ordinary person like Yu Sanjing, Cultivators were the kind of sage-like grandmasters who stood aloof from worldly affairs. But it was a pity that once they lost face, these immortal cultivators would be flustered and exasperated, no different from ordinary people. "You're courting death." Gallian didn't think that Nietian would dare to mock him. He was instantly enraged. With a low roar, he took a step forward, creating a deep pit in the hard ground. After that, he moved his palms, and a powerful force surged out, condensing into a whirlpool between his palms. The atmosphere was incomparably mysterious. Seeing this, Qing Chi's pupils shrunk, and he was overjoyed. Though he only sensed it for a moment, he was certain that Gao Yan's energy came from his lower dantian. In martial arts, the lower dantian is also the place where cultivators awaken their yuan meridians. Judging from the source of energy, there wasn't much difference between immortal cultivators and martial cultivators. Just then, Gao Yan's eyes darkened. Suddenly, he slammed his palm forward. The whirlpool shot out like an arrow and headed straight for Nietian. The corner of Nietian's lips twitched. Unhurriedly, the sword in his palm surged and transformed into a giant whirlpool. It forcefully absorbed the whirlpool, as if swallowing it whole, and merged it with his sword. How is this possible? Gao Yan's face changed color at this scene, and he couldn't help but scream. Nietian had directly absorbed his energy. What was going on? He had been cultivating for many years and has never encountered something like this. This was far too strange and beyond his understanding of the immortal path. Nietian forcefully absorbed the whirlpool. His eyes narrowed as if he was sensing something. Spurt. A while later, Nietian actually opened his mouth slightly and spat out the whirlpool like he was spitting phlegm. "You?" Gao Yan's face flushed with anger when he saw this. He felt that Nietian was humiliating him like this. Nietian smiled and said, "Brother Gao, your energy is truly extraordinary. I really can't absorb it." Gao Yan's face darkened, and he said nothing. The reason why Nietian had forcibly absorbed the cyclone just now was because he wanted to personally experience what kind of power the so-called celestial force was. What surprised him was that immortal energy seemed to have an element as well, but it was different from the 9 energies of the sacred world. It was more like a refined form of the 9 energies. He was very curious as to whether this immortal energy was directly absorbed by cultivators from the outside world or converted from other energies. "Let's stop here," Yu Sanjing said with a smile. Seeing that Nietian and Gao Yin had stopped fighting, Yu Sanjing was very happy and stepped forward with a smile. Nietian nodded slightly, but he had many questions in his mind. When he'd fought just now, he'd clearly sensed a strange power in the space here that greatly suppressed his strength. The strength of the space here was also far stronger than in the sacred world. In fact, it was several times stronger than the space in the peak sacred world. As a result, although the battle between Nietian and Gao Yin seemed very casual, their strength was not weak at all. In terms of martial cultivation, Nietian speculated that Gao Yin should be equivalent to a heavenly tribulation sage ruler or even a heavenly perception sage emperor. Moreover, Gao Yin's mention of the 3rd realm piqued Nietian's curiosity. Was the division of cultivation realms really that simple? Were they just named realms 1, 2, and 3? Although Gao Yin was unwilling, he was no fool. He already knew that he was no match for Nietian, so he could only give up. Everyone once again returned to the hall of the central room. The atmosphere was a little strange, and it was very different from before. "Brother Gao, what did you mean by 3rd realm?" After a moment of silence, Nietian was the first to break the silence with a faint smile. He knew that he might have to rely on Gao Yin if he wanted to quickly visit the Fengtian sect, so he didn't want their relationship to be too strained. "Why should I tell you?" Gao Yin clearly didn't want to reconcile with Nietian and responded with a sneer. The corner of Nietian's mouth twitched. He couldn't help but smile and asked, "I'm guessing that it's the realm of cultivators? So what if it is?" Gao Yin's tone was still cold, as if he didn't want to pay any attention to Nietian. However, Nietian was not embarrassed. He smiled faintly and briefly explained the division of martial realms before asking, "Brother Gao, I'd like to know what the division of cultivation realms is like. Please tell me. Gao Yan's expression was gloomy, but he listened carefully to Niet Tian's explanation of the division of martial realms. His expression softened a little, and he said, "The division of cultivation realms isn't as complicated as the division of martial realms. There are only 6 realms from lowest to highest, the first realm to the 6th realm." Niet Tian frowned, and the corner of his mouth twitched. He really didn't expect the division of cultivation realms to be so simple. Chapter 4575. Niet Tian couldn't help but laugh at the division of realms from the first realm to the 6th realm. Such a simple and direct naming method was beyond anyone's expectations. Supreme Celestial Sovereign said that the cultivation of the body and the mind are the same. 6 realms are enough. There's no need to make it so complicated, Gao Yin said indifferently, seeing what Niet Tian was thinking. That's true. Niet Tian nodded with a smile. He didn't know who the Supreme Celestial Sovereign was, so he didn't ask. He smiled and said, "Brother Gao, may I ask what realm you are at now?" "The 2nd realm." Gao Yan's eyes narrowed slightly, and he immediately showed a proud expression. "The 2nd realm?" Niet Tian couldn't help but be shocked when he heard Gao Yan's answer. Gao Yan saw Niet Tian's reaction and thought that the latter was looking down on his low realm. His face couldn't help but darken. You don't know, Gao Yan is not even 20 years old, but he has already reached the 2nd realm. This is extremely rare in the entire Fengtian sect. Yu Sanjing also thought that Niet Tian was looking down on Gao Yin and quickly explained. So Gao Yin is a genius of the immortal Tao. He is indeed a heroic youth. Qing Chi was also stunned for a moment before he reacted and nodded. Yu Sanjing and the others didn't know that Niet Tian and the others didn't mean to look down on Gao Yin at all, but was purely shocked. Qing Chi had long seen that in the battle between Gao Yin and Niet Tian, Gao Yin was far weaker than Niet Tian, but his strength was also extremely shocking. In terms of martial arts cultivation, Gao Yin should be about the same as a tribulation sage. However, Gao Yin's strength was only at the 2nd realm. This was somewhat unbelievable. If the 2nd realm was equivalent to a tribulation sage, then wouldn't a cultivator at the 6th realm be far stronger than a sky martial saint? Could it be that cultivators of the immortal Tao were much stronger than cultivators of the martial Tao? After a moment, Niet Tian became cold and asked Gao Yin, "Brother Gao, how long have you been in the immortal Tao?" "I entered the Fengtian sect at the age of 6. It has been 13 years since then." Gao Yin could tell that Niet Tian was really curious, so he put away his arrogant attitude and asked, "How long have you been practicing martial arts?" "About 100 years. Niet Tian narrowed his eyes and nodded. If his age in this life was less than 100 years old, but if his previous life was counted, it would be a few hundred years. Niet Tian knew that if he didn't have the accumulation from his previous life, he wouldn't have been able to advance so quickly in this life. So he said 100 years. 100 years. Who knew that when Gao Yin and the others heard Niet Tian's words, they all exclaimed in shock, looking at Niet Tian in disbelief. Niet Tian knew what they were thinking, but he just smiled and didn't explain anything. "Nya, Niet Tian, so you're already over 100 years old?" After a long time, Yu Sanjing was the first to react. He seemed to be too excited and asked with a trembling voice. "Yes." Niet Tian nodded with a smile. "How is that possible?" Yu Lu couldn't help but ask in surprise. "Then why are you so young?" "Young?" Niet Tian's lips twitched, and he said with a faint smile, "In my world, many people who cultivate martial arts are much older than me, and they have always been very young. For those who cultivate martial arts, the higher their cultivation, the longer their lifespan, and the slower their aging speed. Many people who were tens of thousands of years old were no different from 20-year-old young man. However, no matter how high their cultivation was, they would still slowly age. Even if they could maintain their appearance, their martial body would deteriorate." This, Gao Yin and the others looked at each other. They couldn't accept Niet Tian's words at all. In the world of immortals, even a level 6 celestial venerable would age very quickly. Even if they could live up to 1,000 years old, after 100 years, they would look like old people. For a person who was over 100 years old like Tian to look like a 20-year-old young man, it was too unbelievable. Then how old are you? At this time, Gao Yin suddenly looked at Qing Chi with his eyes wide open and asked bluntly. Qing Chi smiled and did not say anything. Instead, he raised a finger. 100 years old? Ah, no, it should be 1,000 years old. Gao Yan's eyes narrowed. He first said 100 years old, but immediately felt that it was wrong and corrected himself. But Qing Chi shook his head. 10,000 years old. Gao Yan was startled again. You Sanjing, you Luer, and the others also looked at Qing Chi as if they were looking at a monster. Qing Chi shook his head again. This? Gao Yan's expression changed, and he gulped. Could it be 100,000 years old? 1,000,000 years old. Qing Chi smiled and nodded. 1,000,000 years old. Gao Yan was shocked, and he let out a strange cry. He was stunned as if he was struck by lightning. How could he imagine that there was someone who had lived for 1,000,000 years in this world? This was even more than in Celestial Venerable. The others were also stunned. The scene was so silent that a pin drop could be heard. In fact, Qing Chi was a little conservative. His real age was much older. After a long time, Gao Yan finally regained his senses and asked Tian solemnly, do all the cultivators in the world of martial arts have such a long life? Yes. Tian nodded and said with a smile. Basically, cultivators who have reached the sage realm have a lifespan of more than 100,000 years. This? Gao Yan gasped, his face blank. Such a long life was far beyond his understanding, and it completely subverted his worldview. It was not an exaggeration to say that if he was given another chance to choose between the immortal Tao and the martial Tao, he would definitely choose the martial Tao. Brother Gao, I'm very curious. What realm is the exalted celestial venerable of the Fengtian sect at? Tian smiled faintly, and when Gao Yin recovered a little, he asked, the fifth realm. Gao Yin was very straightforward and said directly, the fifth realm. Tian was taken aback, and his brows furrowed. Judging from Yu Sanjing's words, the Fengtian sect should be the pinnacle immortal Tao power of the immortal Qi continent. How could its sect master only have a cultivation of the fifth stage? The realms of the immortal Tao are divided into the first to the sixth realm, and each realm is further divided into the three ranks of heaven, earth, and human. Furthermore, each realm has a specific name. Gao Yin calmed down and said, the first realm is an immortal, the second realm is an immortal master, and the third realm is an immortal. Those in the third stage are grand immortal masters. Those in the fourth stage are immortal monarchs. Those in the fifth stage are immortal venerables, and those in the sixth stage are great venerables or high venerables. As far as I know, there are less than 1,000 immortal venerables in the immortal Qi continent, and most of them are human venerables. There are less than 100 earth venerables, and as for heaven venerables, there are less than 5. What about the sixth stage great immortal venerables? Tian's eyes darkened, and he could not help but ask. Probably not. Gao Yin shook his head and revealed a bitter smile. In the history of the immortal Qi continent, there are only about 10 great immortal venerables that can be verified. All of those people were existences that shocked the past and present, and their names will forever be engraved in the history of the immortal Tao. They were revered by tens of thousands of people. As he spoke, Gao Yan's eyes revealed a blazing light, yearning and longing. Chapter 4576. Tian couldn't help but frown at Gao Yan's words. He hadn't expected immortal cultivation to be so difficult. In the long history of the divine Qi continent, only a handful of great celestial venerables had reached level 6. Compared to martial arts, immortal cultivation was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. In martial arts, those who could reach the sky martial realm were few and far between, but not to the extent that they were few and far between. There were many sky martial realm experts in the all-heaven sacred world, but those who could reach level 9 of the sky martial realm were few and far between. Tian, do you really want to visit the Fengtian sect? After a while, Gao Yin calmed down and asked Tian. Yes. Tian's eyes lit up as he nodded vigorously. knowing that he had a good chance of winning. 3 days later, my master will come to Gaoyu village. At that time, I will introduce you to him. You can ask him. Maybe there is hope. Perhaps there's hope if you ask him. Thank you, Brother Gao. Nie Tian was overjoyed and immediately stood up to express his thanks. Gao Yan nodded and looked at Yu Sanjing with a dark expression. Sir Yu, you want Nie Tian to represent Gaoyu village, right? Yu Sanjing was taken aback at first. Then he smiled awkwardly and nodded. Nie Tian was taken aback as well. Only now did he realize that Yu Sanjing wanted him to do this for him. Sir Yu, forgive me for speaking bluntly, but the agreement between Gaoyu village and Fong village should be resolved by the two villages. Outsiders shouldn't interfere. Gao Yan frowned and glanced at Nie Tian. Nie Tian isn't from Gaoyu village. He's not even from the Divine Qi continent. If we let him fight, even if we win against Fong village, we'll become a laughing stock. Yu Sanjing's expression darkened. Gao Yan, Gaoyu village has lost 3 years in a row. If we keep losing, I'm afraid the villagers won't be able to hold on. Gao Yan sighed, then said excitedly, Don't worry, Sir Yu. I'll definitely win for Gaoyu village this time. Gao Yan, our Gaoyu village has been weak for a long time. The number of immortal cultivators is far less than that of Fong village. No matter how strong you are, you can only win one round. Yu Sanjing shook his head and said, To tell you the truth, I passed by Fong village not long ago and heard that Fong Yang's cultivation has already reached the 3rd realm. There's also Fong Wu, Fong Run, and Fong Yuan. They're all 2nd realm immortal masters and aren't any weaker than you. Look at our Gaoyu village. Apart from you, only Yudong has some strength. The others don't have any battle power. Under such circumstances, if we don't bring in reinforcements, we'll definitely lose. With that, Yu Sanjing sighed and lowered his head. According to my knowledge, Fong Yong had just attained the 2nd stage of the heaven rank a few months ago. How could he have broken through to the 3rd stage in such a short period of time? Gao Yan's expression changed, and he was extremely shocked. He knew Fong Yong, who was also a cultivator of the Feng Tian sect. Although they didn't have the same master, they could be considered as fellow disciples. He couldn't believe that Fong Yong was able to break through to the 3rd realm in just a few months. Sir Yu, what's going on? Qing Shi had more or less guessed what was going on after listening to their conversation, but he still asked. Yu Sanjing sighed once more, and only then did he tirelessly explain the whole story. It turned out that Gaoyu village and the neighboring Fong village had always been on bad terms. The main source of their conflict was a canal between the two villages. The two villages were very close to the canal, and the other canals were very far away. Therefore, both villages wanted to claim the canal as their own. The dispute over the canal was very intense. In order not to cause large-scale casualties, the two villages agreed to a duel every year. Each side would send out 3 people to fight in pairs, and 2 out of 3 would win. Because Gaoyu village's talents had dwindled in recent years, it had suffered defeat for 3 years in a row. This year, it was almost time for the duel. Yu Sanjing had no choice but to turn to Nie Tian, hoping to use Nie Tian's strength to win the duel. So that's how it is. After listening to Yu Sanjing, Nie Tian couldn't help but glance at Gao Yan. I think Brother Gao is right. After all, this duel is a matter between your two villages. As an outsider, it's not appropriate for me to interfere. Nie Tian, Yu Sanjing's face froze when he heard Nie Tian's excuse. He was momentarily speechless. He had no reason to insist on Nie Tian's help. Moreover, he knew that it was indeed inappropriate to ask for an outsider's help in a duel between two villages. However, I can spar with Brother Gao and learn from each other so that Brother Gao can face the battle in a better state. Nie Tian smiled and looked at Gao Yan. Gao Yan's face reddened. Even if Nie Tian spoke tactfully, how could he not hear that Nie Tian intended to guide him? Although Nie Tian was a martial cultivator, there were many similarities between martial and immortal Dao. Moreover, Nie Tian's strength was far above Gao Yan's, so Nie Tian was indeed qualified to guide Gao Yan. Yu Sanjing's expression was ugly, but he could only nod reluctantly. Since things had come to this, it was useless to force it. They could only leave it at that for now. In the next few days, Nye Tian and Gao Yin exchanged pointers and became more familiar with each other. Gao Yin's attitude also gradually changed. After a few exchanges, he was extremely respectful of Nye Tian. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. Early in the morning, Nye Tian woke up and went to find Gao Yin. Gao Yin said that his master would come to Gaoyu village today, and he could introduce him to Nye Tian. As soon as he arrived at Gao Yin's house, Nye Tian heard the sound of an intense quarrel. Nye Tian frowned and walked quickly to the Gao family's courtyard. He saw a middle-aged man in gray and a few young men in green. They seemed to be arguing with Gao Yin about something. Immortal cultivators. Nye Tian's heart sank when he saw these people and faintly sensed the surging aura of immortal power. After spending a few days with Gao Yin, he had become quite familiar with immortal power and found a way to sense it. At this moment, he sensed that the young men had surging immortal power around them. Their auras were not inferior to Gao Yan's. As for the middle-aged man in gray, his aura was even stronger, far stronger than Gao Yan's. If Gao Yan's immortal power was a stream, then the middle-aged man's immortal power was a river. This middle-aged man is at least a third realm grand immortal master. He might even be a fourth realm immortal lord. Nye Tian thought to himself as he walked into the courtyard. Gao Yin, hurry and call your brother out. Our master wants to test his immortal foundation. Sukum, Master Liang, I have already told you that my master will be in charge of my brother's immortal foundation test. Why do you have to interfere? Master Liang, I have already told you that my master will be in charge of my younger brother's immortal foundation test. Why do you have to interfere? Although his tone was respectful, the anger in his eyes could not be suppressed. Although his tone was still respectful, the anger in his eyes was somewhat uncontrollable. Your master and I are good friends. What difference does it make who will take the immortal foundation test? The middle-aged man called Master Liang's expression darkened. As he spoke, he released a vigorous pressure that turned into an invisible hand that pressed towards Gao Yin. Chapter 4577. Boom! As the gray-robed middle-aged man, Liang Zhao, spoke, he released an invisible pressure that pressed down on Gao Yin. Before Gao Yin could react, he felt his chest being locked down by a terrifying force. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Since you're not saying anything, it means you have no objections. Liang Zhao smiled, then waved his hand and said to the young man behind him, Fong Run, go get Gao Yan's younger brother. Yes, master. Fong Ren nodded and smiled, the corners of his mouth curling into a cold smile. Wait a minute. But before Fong Ren could take a step, a voice was heard, and a figure slowly walked over. Nye Tian. Gao Yan's eyes lit up when he saw Nye Tian, and he exclaimed in surprise. Sir, since Gao Yan doesn't want you to do the immortal foundation test for his younger brother, why do you have to force him? Nye Tian smiled faintly and walked step by step towards Gao Yan. The sword intent around his body was activated, and he forcefully broke down Liang Zhao's pressure. Gao Yan immediately recovered and panted heavily. He looked angrily at Liang Zhao and said, Master Liang, you are an immortal monarch of the Fengtian sect. How dare you threaten a junior like me? How despicable! Liang Zhao was actually Gao Yan's martial uncle, and Gao Yan usually respected him. Liang Zhao didn't expect Liang Zhao to be so domineering, without the slightest bit of calmness that a cultivator should have. Who are you? Liang Zhao, however, didn't pay any attention to Gao Yan's anger. He stared coldly at Nye Tian with a pair of incomparably sinister eyes. He was surprised that Nye Tian could easily break through his pressure, but he couldn't sense any immortal force from Nye Tian's body. As far as he knew, to be able to release immortal force so easily without leaving a trace, one had to be at least a 5th stage immortal supremacy. Could it be that the young man in front of him was already in immortal supremacy? But how was that possible? There were less than 1,000 immortal sovereigns on the immortal Qi continent, and every one of them was a famous powerhouse. Moreover, Liang Zhao knew that the youngest immortal reverend in the immortal Qi continent was at least 30 years old. However, the person in front of him looked very young, only about 20 years old. I'm Gao Yan's friend. Nye Tian smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth curling up into a strange arc, faintly carrying a hint of provocation. Friend? Liang Zhao's face darkened, and he couldn't help but glance at Gao Yan. He thought, when did this guy make such a powerful friend? Master, there's no need to talk nonsense with him. Just get him a scram. Fong Run, who was at the side, had yet to figure out the situation. With a low grunt, he took a step forward and stretched out his palm. A vigorous force pushed towards Nye Tian. Bang! Instantly, a muffled sound came from the sky. But Nye Tian, like an old tree with its roots entrenched, did not move an inch. Fong Ren frowned, and his expression changed. He then roared in a low voice, "How dare you resist? You're courting death." As soon as he finished speaking, he directly struck out his palm towards Nye Tian. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed, and the sword chi around him surged, but he still did not move. Bang! In the next moment, Fong Ren's palm fell, but it was as if he had hit a steel plate. A muffled sound was heard, and when he retracted his hand, his entire palm was a bloody mess, as if it had been cut countless times by a sharp blade. Even the bones of his palm were exposed. On my hand, the intense pain and horror caused Fong Run to scream like a pig being slaughtered. He retreated continuously, not daring to take a step closer to Nye Tian. This is Gao Yan's house. You're the unwelcome ones, and you're the ones who should scram. Nye Tianling laughed, completely ignoring Fong Run. His eyes were like sharp blades, staring at Liang Zhao. Little brother, may I ask which sect are you from? And why are you interfering in the affairs of the Feng Tian sect? Liang Zhao could naturally feel the threat from Nye Tian, but he still suppressed his anger and asked cold. From the strength that Nye Tian displayed, he was at least an immortal lord, or even an immortal venerable. Liang Zhao had never heard of a young, immortal venerable appearing in the divine Qi continent. He was not confident that he could defeat Nye Tian, so he could only use the Feng Tian sect to pressure him. In my opinion, this is not the Feng Tian sect's business, but Gao Yan's. Of course, Nye Tian understood the meaning behind Liang Zhao's words. He smiled cold and said, Gao Yan is my friend, and you're bullying him like this. Naturally, I have to intervene. Liang Zhao's eyes darkened when he heard Nye Tian's words. His face was so gloomy that it almost dripped water. He had never expected that not only was Nye Tian's strength astonishing, but his words were also so sharp. Gao Yan, you allowed your friend to hurt a fellow disciple. What are your intentions? At this moment, a young immortal stood out from behind Liang Zhao. His eyes were incomparably sinister as he looked at Gao Yan cold and shouted. Gao Yan was speechless and did not know what to say. He also did not expect Nye Tian to be so ruthless and cripple Fong Ren's hand. You guys are flaunting your strength in the Gao family, but have you ever cared about your fellow disciples? Nye Tian's eyes darkened. He took a step forward and said in a deep voice, Moreover, me injuring Fong Ren has nothing to do with Gao Yan. It was my own idea. If any of you are dissatisfied, feel free to challenge me. Liang Zhao's face darkened. It was indescribably ugly. The more powerful Nye Tian was, the more he could not gauge his strength, and the more fearful he became. Damn, brat, you are too arrogant. However, another young immortal couldn't hold it in any longer. He growled and threw a punch. The punch was fierce and headed straight for Nye Tian's face. Nye Tian's eyes darkened. Instantly, his sword intent rose, and a wave of sword energy rose, knocking his opponent away. Wretch! That person stumbled back a few steps before stabilizing himself. But in the next second, a ray of sword energy whizzed by and left a glaring sword mark on his cheek. You! That person screamed in shock. But when he sensed Nye Tian's chi, he was so frightened that he couldn't speak. When others saw this, they all gasped. They were shocked by Nye Tian's strength. They did not expect the young man before them to be so terrifying. Also, the power Nye Tian displayed was unfamiliar to them. It was like a completely different chi. It was extremely strange. Gao Yan was also stunned. He didn't expect Nye Tian to be so domineering. Nie Tian's strength also shocked him. A few days ago, he had been sparring with Nie Tian. Though he was at a disadvantage, he thought Nie Tian was only slightly stronger than him. Only now did he realize that Nie Tian was much stronger than him. He had just been hiding his strength. The disciple can't do it. As the master, are you still not going to make a move? At this time, Nie Tian suddenly looked at Liang Zhao, and his calm tone was extremely provocative, directly threatening Liang Zhao. Chapter 4578. Nie Tian's gaze was cold as he locked onto Liang Zhao. His provocation was extremely arrogant. Liang Zhao's face darkened when he was provoked in front of so many disciples. However, his eyes were filled with hesitation. He did not expect Nie Tian to challenge him directly. This made him even more fearful. If he was not confident, Nie Tian would not dare to be so arrogant. However, the current situation had forced him to accept the challenge. Otherwise, he would not have the face to be someone else's master. Nie Tian, right? Liang Zhao said coldly. His aura surged and sacred light spread out, causing ripples in the void. No one dared to look at him directly. Make your move. Nie Tian did not care at all. He smiled faintly, and his sword intent surged out to meet Liang Zhao head-on. Bang! The moment the two auras collided, there was a muffled sound in the void. The two figures took 3 steps back at the same time. So, this is the strength of a level 4 Immortal Lord. Nie Tian stabilized his figure, and his lips curled up into a faint smile. The reason why he challenged Liang Zhao was not because he was arrogant. He just wanted to see how strong an Immortal Lord was. Liang Zhao also stabilized his figure, but he looked a little disheveled. His eyes were cold as if he was calculating something. The clash of auras just now surprised him. It seemed that Nie Tian's strength was not as strong as he had imagined. However, Nie Tian's aura shocked him. He had fought with countless swordsmen and seen many sword intents. However, it was his first time seeing someone with such a pure sword intent like Nie Tian. Moreover, the aura of Nie Tian's sword intent was completely unfamiliar, as if it did not belong to this world. Feng Ren and the others who were watching the battle were completely dumbfounded. They could not see through Nie Tian's strength. They only thought that he was about the same age and strength as them. However, it seemed that Nie Tian's strength was not inferior to their master, Liang Zhao. How could they not be shocked? Gallian was also dumbfounded. He looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression and could not react for a long time. He was mentally prepared, but he did not expect Nie Tian to be on par with Liang Zhao. Nie Tian, who exactly are you? Liang Zhao calmed himself down and looked at Nie Tian with a grim look in his eyes. Even if Nie Tian was not as strong as he had imagined, he was still a monster. After all, anyone who was able to step foot into the 4th stage at the age of 20 was a genius of the heavens. They would definitely be able to advance to the celestial venerable realm in the future and even have a great chance of becoming a heaven stage celestial venerable. It was even possible for them to reach the 6th stage celestial venerable realm and create a legend. According to Liang Zhao's knowledge, there were less than 100 immortal lords under the age of 20 in the entire continent. He was a heaven-rank celestial duke, and Nie Tian was on par with him. Therefore, Nie Tian was most likely a heaven-rank celestial duke. A 20-year-old heaven-rank immortal lord was simply too terrifying. I am Gallian's friend. Nie Tian smiled faintly. Since he already understood the strength of an immortal lord, he did not want to push it too far. After all, he still had to visit the Feng Tian sect. You. Liang Zhao knew that Nie Tian was deliberately avoiding his question. He was so angry that his face turned pale. Master Liang, my master will be here soon. Do you want to stay and watch my brother's immortal foundation test? At this moment, Gallian stood up and said coldly. Since Liang Zhao did not have the respect of an elder, there was no need for him to be so polite. Let's go. Liang Zhao glared at Nie Tian. He knew that with Nie Tian here, he would not have a chance to do anything. He shouted and left with Feng Ren and the others. I won't send you off. Gallian snorted and did not even look at Liang Zhao and the others. Gallian, the battle between our 2 villages is about to begin. Take care of yourself. Before leaving, Fong Run, who had lost a hand to Nietan, shot a fierce glance at Gao Yin, a cold smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. Gao Yin's mouth twitched, but he did not say anything. They are all from the Fengtian sect. Nietan waited until Liang Zhao and the others were far away before asking. Yes. Gao Yin nodded his head and said, that middle-aged man is called Liang Zhao. He is an outer sect elder of the Fengtian sect. The others are his disciples. That Liang Zhao seems to want to test your brother's immortal foundation. What is going on? Nietan nodded his head and asked. Gao Yin's gaze slightly froze. He paused for a moment and said, my brother is 6 years old this year. Not long ago, I discovered that his immortal foundation is not bad. It is very likely that he has the fire spirit physique of the 5 immortal physiques. I reported this matter to the sect. The sect decided to let my master come and test my brother's immortal foundation. But I don't know how this news was leaked. Liang Zhao also knew about it. He actually came before my master and wanted to forcefully test my brother's immortal foundation. Nietan frowned and said, what benefits does Liang Zhao get from testing your brother's immortal foundation? I don't know. Gao Yin shook his head and said, I am not familiar with Liang Zhao, but his disciple Fong Run, the guy whose hand was injured by you, is from our neighboring village, Fong Village. I suspect that Liang Zhao and Fong Run are up to no good, so I don't dare to let them test my brother. Yes. Nietan slightly nodded his head. Gao Yan's concerns were indeed very necessary. Liang Zhao and the others being so forceful was indeed very suspicious. When will your master arrive? Then, Nietan asked again. Gao Yan's expression slightly darkened. He shook his head and said, according to the agreed time, master should have arrived a long time ago. Why is he not here yet? He was a little worried. Could something have happened to him? But this was Fengming Mountain. There shouldn't be anyone who would dare to make a move against the Fengtian sect. Then, Nietan and Gao Yin waited for a long time, but Gao Yin's master did not arrive. The two discussed for a while and decided to go out of the village to take a look. Nietan said goodbye to Qing Qi and Mo Rushi, and then left Gaoyu village with Gao Yin. The two walked along the path out of the village, quickly all the way, and soon arrived at the Heaven Stairway to the Fengtian sect. This is the only way for the Fengtian sect to reach Gaoyu village. Why don't I see master's figure? Gao Yin murmured and could not help but become even more worried. He had great respect for his master and knew that the latter was a person who kept his promise. If there was no accident, how could he be missing for so long? At this moment, Nietan suddenly heard the faint sound of fighting in the distance, and his face could not help but change. Nietan, what's wrong with you? Gao Yin noticed that Nietan's expression was strange, and he could not help but be nervous and asked nervously, follow me. Nietan did not say much and directly ran in the direction of the fighting sound. Gao Yin did not know what happened, but the feeling of uneasiness in his heart grew stronger and stronger and immediately followed. In the woods, several men in black surrounded a middle-aged woman who was standing in the middle of a blood-soaked woman. On the side, there were several men in green lying in disorder, motionless and obviously dead. Who are you people? The blood-soaked woman's body was swaying, and it was obvious that she was seriously injured, but she still persisted and asked in a deep voice, is there any meaning to know the truth for a person who is about to die? The leader of the men in black spoke coldly and suddenly waved his hand, and a palm fell from the void, and a violent force blasted down directly toward the blood-soaked woman. The blood-soaked woman wanted to resist, but she was too injured and could not use her strength at all. Puff! At the moment of life and death, a sharp sound of air breaking came from the void, and a sword intent whistled over, directly smashing the fierce attack of the men in black. The next moment, a silver-haired figure descended and stood coldly in front of the blood-soaked woman, like a mountain, majestic and unyielding. It was Nietan. Chapter 45-79. Several men in black were shocked by the scene in front of them. When they realized that it was a young man standing in front of them, they were filled with killing intent. You are Puff. The woman was also very surprised. She was about to speak when she felt a surge of chi and blood and spat out a mouthful of blood. Master! Before Nyetian could say anything, Gao Yin had already rushed over. Upon seeing the blood-soaked woman, he exclaimed in shock. The woman was none other than Qin Qinglan, the master he had been waiting for. Gao Yin. Qin Qinglan was surprised to see Gao Yin. Then his expression changed and he shouted, "Get out of here! Do you think you can leave?" A man in black sneered. He moved at an extremely fast speed like a ghost and came to Gao Yan's side in an instant. A murderous aura spread out and covered the void dozens of meters around him. Gao Yan. Qin Qinglan's pupils shrank involuntarily, and she screamed in fear. However, in the next moment, Nyetian stretched out his hand, and a vigorous force lifted Qin Qinglan high into the sky. Then, an immense sword intent enveloped him like a protective shield. Then, Nyetian took a step and the sword essence swept across the sky, forcing the men in black to retreat. Boy, go to hell. Almost at the same time, the black-clothed man made his move. He sneered, and a sinister palm pierced through the air, heading straight for Gao Yan. Celestial Sir. Gao Yan's heart sank, and his face stiffened as he felt the oppressive force coming towards him. He didn't expect that the man in black was a Celestial Sir. It was very likely that he was a Heaven Stage Celestial Sir. He was only a Celestial Master in the second stage. How could he resist the fatal palm of a Heaven Stage Celestial Sir in the fourth stage? At the moment of life and death, Gao Yin suddenly felt a powerful force surging behind him, which made his whole body tremble, and he involuntarily hit out with his palm. Bang! The two palms collided, and the void exploded. Gao Yin didn't move at all, but the man in black was hit by the impact and took several steps back. Gao Yin was shocked by the scene in front of him, but he immediately reacted and was overjoyed. Gao Yin, you step aside. But the next moment, he heard Nyetian's voice. Then he realized that Nyetian was helping him from behind. Be careful. Gao Yin nodded. He knew that he couldn't help facing such an enemy, so he stepped aside obediently. Nyetian waved his hand and released a powerful sword essence, which turned into a sword shield that wrapped Gao Yin. Only then did he feel at ease. His eyes narrowed slightly, and a chilling intent swept across the group of black-clothed people. He said indifferently, "Let me deal with you." "Boy, who are you?" The leader of the black-clothed men realized that Nyetian's strength was not to be underestimated. He suppressed his shock and asked in a deep voice. The fact that Nyetian was able to block his palm strike and help a Celestial Master fight a Celestial Duke head-on showed how powerful he was. However, the black-clothed man could not understand why Nyetian, who looked to be in his 20s, had such strength. "Beat me, or get lost." Nyetian didn't want to talk nonsense and said directly, "Boy, you're too arrogant." The other black-clothed man was furious. He roared and swung the saber in his hand. The saber in his hand slashed down fiercely. The saber intent was endless, turning into a deadly saber shadow. Nyetian didn't move at all. He stood still and blocked the saber shadow with his sword momentum. How was this possible? The black-clothed swordsman was horrified and immediately shouted. He was a fourth realm Earth Stage Celestial Sir. Combined with his saber intent, he could threaten a Heaven Stage Celestial Sir. But Nyetian was calm and looked very relaxed. He was much more powerful than a Heaven Stage Celestial Sir. Could it be that this silver-haired young man was a fifth realm Celestial Sir? But he had never heard of a 20-year-old Celestial Sir from the Fengtian sect. Because Gao Yin called Qin Qinglan Master, the man in black naturally regarded Nyetian as a member of the Fengtian sect. Nyetian was indeed a member of the Fengtian sect, but not the Fengtian sect here. In the sky, Qin Qinglan, who was covered by the sword intent shield, was also shocked by Nyetian's strength. Her eyes trembled slightly, and it took a long time for her to react. She had been seriously injured when fighting with these men in black, so she naturally knew their strength. However, the fact that Nyetian was able to deal with the black-clothed man with ease was too unexpected. "Let's kill him together." The leader of the men in black made a prompt decision. His figure flashed, and in the blink of an eye, there were 8 illusory figures. At the same time, the figures of the other men in black also moved. Their steps were filled with the chi of the formation. Immortal formation? Nietian saw that the positions of the men in black were very regular, and there was a faint, mysterious power surging in the void. His eyes couldn't help but sink. These men in black were all immortal masters. If they joined forces to set up the immortal formation, it would be very disadvantageous to Nietian. Nietian was very unfamiliar with the immortal formation. If he fell into it, it would be difficult to break it. Step back. Qin Qinglan, who was high up in the sky, was shocked and shouted. She could see that Nietian's strength should be around the 5th realm human stage, celestial sir. If he fell into the immortal formation of the men in black, it would be terrible. Unfortunately, it was too late by the time she finished speaking. Boom! In an instant, the immortal formation was unfolded and directly enveloped Nietian. Nietian immediately felt an oppressive force coming from the void, making it difficult for him to breathe. However, that was all there was to it. Boy, you're dead. Seeing that Nietian was trapped in the formation, the leader of the men in black sneered and said in a deep voice, under the 9 tribulations formation, unless you have the cultivation of a heaven stage, celestial sir, you are doomed to hate. Is that so? Nietian smiled faintly, the corner of his mouth raised indifferently, as if he was mocking. How dare you be so arrogant when you're about to die? The leader of the men in black suddenly became furious. He raised his hands, and suddenly the void seemed to be responding to him. A powerful force rolled out and pressed towards Nietian. Although Nietian was trapped in the 9 tribulations formation, he did not panic at all. His footwork was calm, and at the same time, he unsheathed the sword in the sky and slashed down, resolving the crisis in front of him. Huh! The leader of the men in black's face darkened. He suddenly felt that Nietian's sword essence seemed to have increased several times in an instant, which surprised him a lot. But he was still very calm and said in a deep voice, "It seems that I have underestimated you." It turned out that Nietian had hidden his strength just now. No wonder he was so confident. But this was nothing. The leader of the men in black was very confident in the 9 tribulations formation, unless Nietian was a heaven stage celestial sir. But there were only a few heaven stage celestial sir in the entire immortal Chi continent, and Nietian was so young, it was impossible for him to have the cultivation of a heaven stage celestial sir. Your 9 tribulations formation is just SOSO. Nietian's mouth twitched, and he said indifferently, "Why don't I show you my formation?" Boom, boom, boom. As soon as he finished speaking, sword essence rose from the surroundings like a giant dragon, roaring and shaking the heaven and earth. The leader of the men in black was very surprised, and for a moment, he was speechless. 12 heaven slaying sword formation, open. The corner of Nietian's mouth rose slightly, and as soon as he finished speaking, the sword formation was opened. Bang! And at the same moment the sword formation was opened, the void rumbled, and the 9 tribulations formation shattered. Chapter 4580. The 12 heaven attacking sword formation was opened, and the 9 tribulations formation was broken. Boom! Suddenly, as the 2 formations were opened and broken, the majestic impact surged, forcing all the men in black to retreat. How is this possible? The leader of the men in black steadied his body and looked at the scene in front of him in horror. He couldn't believe it. The 9 tribulations formation was his last trump card. How could it be broken in an instant? Who was Nietian? How could he have such strength? There were many questions in his mind, and his face was full of horror. The other men in black were all injured to varying degrees, and they all looked at Nietian in horror. The silver-haired young man in front of them was far beyond their expectations. He was too terrifying. Qin Qinglan, who was high up in the sky, was also shocked by the scene just now. Her bloody lips trembled slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but she couldn't make a sound. At that moment, the power that erupted from Nietian was too horrible. She had only seen it from celestial primes. Could it be that this young swordsman, who looked only 20 years old, was really a celestial prime? Gao Yin was so shocked that he was like a wooden chicken. He felt like he was in a dream and was in a daze. Only at this moment did he truly realize how vast the gap between him and Yetian was. Perhaps the difference between heaven and earth couldn't even be described with words. I don't want to kill anyone today. Why don't you get out of here? Yetian's eyes were cold. He glanced at the men in black and said in a deep voice, "Let's go." The leader of the men in black trembled. Obviously, he didn't expect that Tian would let them go. He didn't dare to delay, so he roared and left first. The other men in black immediately followed and disappeared in the blink of an eye. After Tian was sure that the men in black had left, he put away his sword and shield and released Qin Xinglan and Gao Yan. "Thank you for your help, little brother Tian. I, Qin Xinglan, will never forget your kindness for saving my life." Qin Xinglan recovered a little in the sword and shield. She came to Tian and thanked him solemnly. She didn't know Tian's identity, so she was very respectful. "Qin, sure, you're being too serious." Tian nodded slightly, but his expression was a little ugly. Since Gao Yin called Liang Zhao Master Liang, Tian directly called Qin Xinglan Master Qin. "Tian, why didn't you kill them?" Gao Yin, on the other hand, was somewhat puzzled. He looked at Tian and said, "Letting a tiger return to the mountain will cause endless trouble in the future." Because his master had been seriously injured by these black-clothed men, and several of his fellow disciples had been killed, he was clearly unhappy that Tian had let the black-clothed men leave. Tian frowned. Just as he was about to explain, his chest suddenly tightened and he spat out a mouthful of filthy blood. His face instantly became as pale as paper. "Tian, are you hurt?" Gao Yin was taken aback. He was shocked. When he saw Tian destroy the black-robed man's 9 tribulations formation, he thought that the latter's strength could crush the black-robed man. He didn't expect that he would also be injured. And from the looks of it, his injuries were not light. "I'm fine." Tian took a deep breath and looked a little better. He endured the sharp pain in his body and forced a smile. He had long felt that the environment here had a certain suppression on his martial body, so his strength had been weakened a lot. More importantly, every time he operated his primordial meridian, it seemed that the suppression in the void would increase. Just now, when he forcibly activated the 12 heaven slaying sword formation, the pressure on his primordial meridian had almost reached the limit. If not, he would not have let the black-clothed men go so easily. In addition, Tian had not recovered from a serious injury, so at this time, his qi and blood were not flowing smoothly, and he directly spat out filthy blood. "Gao Yin, deal with their bodies. I'll examine them for Tian." The blood on Qin Xinglan's body gradually dissipated. As he spoke, he looked at Tian with some doubt in his eyes. "Okay." Gao Yin agreed and began to deal with the bodies of his fellow disciples. On the side, Tian noticed that Qin Xinglan's gaze was strange. He couldn't help but ask with a smile, "Master Qin, why are you looking at me like this? I feel a completely different and unfamiliar aura from you." Qin Xinglan's beautiful eyes slightly narrowed. She did not have any scruples and directly asked, "You're not from the immortal Qi continent, are you?" "Yes." Tian was stunned for a moment and then nodded. Since the other party had already seen through him, there was no point in hiding it anymore. Immediately, Tian briefly explained his origin and finally said, "Master Qin, it was really an accident that we came to the immortal Qi continent this time. Now I want to visit the Fontian sect and ask to see the supreme immortal master. Please help us." After listening to Tian's words, Qin Xinglan calmed down after a long time and said, "You saved my life, so I will naturally help you. However, my position in the Fontian sect is low. Even if I want to help you, I can only bring you into the Fontian sect at most. It is almost impossible for you to see the immortal master. I know that the supreme immortal master is of high status, but I sincerely ask to see him. Please pass the message for me, Master Qin." Tian frowned and said in a heavy tone. Qin Xinglan shook his head helplessly and said, "You don't know. The immortal master has been in seclusion for more than 10 years. These years, the affairs of the sect have been handled by the three immortal masters. Previously, there were also high-level people from other sects who asked to see the immortal master, but they were all rejected. With that, Qin Xinglan looked at Nietian and continued, "Even if you are an outsider, I'm afraid the hope of seeing the immortal master is slim." This, Nietian frowned and was speechless for a while. It seemed that it was not easy to see the Feng Tian immortal. "Nietian, you don't have to worry. When Gao Yan's matters are settled, I will take you into the Feng Tian sect. At that time, you can go see the three immortal masters and explain the situation to them." Qin Xinglan did not know why Nietian had to see the Feng Tian immortal, so he could only comfort him. Okay. Nietian had no choice but to nod his head. Then, after Gao Yan dealt with the corpses, the three returned to Gaoyu village and soon arrived at the Gao clan. "Master, you are seriously injured. Why don't we wait for the immortal root test until tomorrow?" Gao Yan said as he walked in front of them. "No need. I want to finish the immortal root test as soon as possible and return to the Feng Tian sect as soon as possible to report to the sect about the attack." Qin Xinglan seemed to be very anxious and said in a deep voice, "Okay then, I will call Gao Jin out now." Gao Yan nodded and quickly brought out a little boy of 6 or 7 years old. The little boy looked strong and had a chubby face. His eyes were like black gems, extremely lively. "Master, this is my brother, Gao Jin." Gao Yan brought Gao Jin in front of Qin Xinglan, looking a little excited. Qin Xinglan's beautiful eyes darkened slightly. After they fell on Gao Jin, she could not move her eyes away. Brother. After all, Gao Jin was still young. He could not help but be a little afraid of being stared at by a stranger. He could not help but take 2 steps back and pull the corner of Gao Yan's clothes. "Don't be afraid. I am here." Gao Yan immediately squatted down and held Gao Jin's little hand. Then he looked at Qin Xinglan and asked uneasily, "Master, what did you see?" Qin Xinglan's expression was a little strange. She seemed to be very shocked, but at the same time, she was a little uneasy, as if she was worried about something. Chapter 4581. Qin Xinglan didn't seem to hear Gao Yan's words. He kept staring at Gao Jin, and his expression became more and more strange. "Master, what's wrong? Say something." Gao Yan couldn't help but ask again. Gao Jin seemed to feel threatened by Qin Xinglan. He kept retreating, trying to hide behind Gao Yan. Nietian frowned. He didn't sense anything unusual from Gao Jin. Perhaps the immortal world here had seriously affected his perception. I don't think so. After a long time, Qin Xinglan finally spoke, but he seemed to be in a daze. He kept shaking his head and murmuring, "Master, what are you talking about? What's going on?" Gao Yan was anxious and afraid. He couldn't help but take a step forward and ask seriously, "Gao Yan, I'm going to test Gao Jin's immortal root immediately." Qin Xinglan calmed down, as if he didn't hear Gao Yan's words at all. Okay. Gao Yan didn't know what Qin Xinglan had discovered, so he could only nod. Qin Xinglan took a deep breath and flipped his palm, holding a jade-white compass. Looking closely, the compass was divided into 3 layers. Each layer could be rotated freely, and there was a mysterious flow of immortal force on it. The design was extremely delicate. "Gao Yan, you should know what to do." Qin Xinglan handed the compass to Gao Yan and nodded slightly. There was a hidden worry in his eyes, as if he was worried about something terrible. Gao Yan nodded and took the compass. He touched Gao Jin's head and said, "Little brother, don't be afraid. Do what I tell you to do, okay?" "Okay." Gao Jin nodded, obviously trusting his brother very much. "Little brother, give me your hand." Gao Yan glanced at Qin Xinglan, obviously noticing his abnormality, but he still said it. Gao Jin obediently extended his little hand. Gao Yan's eyes narrowed slightly, and his fingertips touched Gao Jin's little hand lightly. A thin wound appeared, and blood flowed out. "Brother, it hurts." Gao Jin looked at his bleeding hand, but he was not afraid. He just whispered, "It's okay. It'll be fine in a while." Gao Yan forced out a smile and held Gao Jin's little hand, letting the blood drip onto the compass. At the instant the blood dripped onto the ground, the compass actually started to rotate. Light flowed on it, and strange symbols appeared on it. Galleon was not in a hurry. He quietly looked at the compass in his hand, as if waiting for something. This is the immortal foundation test? Nyetian watched from the side and couldn't help but mutter curiously. Galleon glanced at Nyetian and explained, "This compass is called the immortal compass. It is used to test immortal roots. The strength of a person's immortal root could be judged by 3 levels: immortal palace, immortal elephant, and immortal spirit. The immortal disc is divided into 3 layers, and they are used to test the immortal palace, immortal elephant, and immortal spirit respectively." "I see." Nyetan nodded and couldn't help but ask, "Then how do we determine the strength of the immortal palaces, immortal elephants, and immortal spirits?" "Normally, the strength of the immortal palace, immortal elephant, and immortal spirit are ranked from the lowest to the highest." Gao Yin observed the changes of the symbols on the compass and said, "The immortal palace, immortal elephant, and immortal spirit of a normal person are of the same level. Even if there is a difference, it won't be too big." Nyetian nodded and was instantly curious about Gao Jin's immortal root. On the immortal disc, the symbols flowed, forming a colorful halo in the air. It was extremely beautiful. Nyetian stared at the symbols for a long time, and finally realized that these symbols seemed to be moving according to some kind of pattern and were slowly condensing. As the symbols condensed faster and faster, the light on the immortal disc became brighter and brighter. Soon it became blinding white, almost blinding. A moment later, the symbols condensed into 3 scarlet words on the immortal disc. 999. Immortal palace, immortal elephant, and immortal spirit are all at the 9th level. No matter how stupid Nyetian was, he could see the result and couldn't help but exclaim, "All 3 are at the 9th level. This is the highest result. I really have the body of the fire spirit." Gao Yin was also excited. He couldn't help but look at Qin Xinglan, who was so excited that he almost jumped up. However, at this moment, Qin Xinglan looked terrible. His lips were trembling, and he seemed to be saying something in a low voice. "Master, what's wrong with you?" Gao Yin was shocked by Qin Xinglan. The smile on his face froze, and he asked in a trembling voice, "How could this be? How could this be? How could this be?" Qin Xinglan's mouth twitched slightly, and he shook his head repeatedly. He couldn't accept the result in front of him. Gao Yin was puzzled and shocked. The body of the fire spirit that Gao Jin had tested was one of the supreme immortal roots. Why did Qin Xinglan have such a reaction? Is this result not good? Nyetian was also confused. Qin Xinglan had been behaving strangely since he saw Gao Jin, which was really puzzling. "Brother, what's wrong with my sister?" Gao Jin scratched his head and looked up at Gao Yin. After all, he was still a child, and he had no idea what was going on. Gao Yin waved his hand to signal Gao Jin not to speak. He didn't dare to ask Qin Xinglan again, and could only wait at the side. After a long time, Qin Xinglan calmed down a little, but his eyes were fixed on the celestial plate. He seemed to be hesitating, and at the same time, he was afraid of something. Gao Yin opened the celestial plate. After a while, Qin Xinglan finally made up his mind and said seriously, "Master, why do you open the celestial plate?" Gao Yin couldn't help but ask with a puzzled look. "Open it." Qin Xinglan didn't explain, but said in an unquestionable tone, "Okay." Gao Yin had no choice but to open the celestial plate slowly, layer by layer. When he opened the 3rd layer, he saw a strange pattern in the center of the celestial plate, which made his expression stagnate, and he was stunned. Nyetian frowned and stretched his head to take a look. There was a black pattern in the center of the immortal plate. It was a faint inverted cross. Although it did not give off any aura, it gave off an extremely evil feeling. It's a predestined fate, a predestined fate. When Qin Xinglan saw the evil pattern, he seemed to have expected it, so he wasn't too surprised. He was just shocked, and then he sighed repeatedly. "Master Qin, what does this mean?" Nyetian was confused, and he couldn't help but ask Qin Xinglan. "This is the triple evil's celestial root." Qin Xinglan sighed, and then he suddenly turned around, a pair of cold eyes fixed on Gao Jin, and said word by word, I want to bring this child back to the sect. Master, don't. Little brother is still a child. He doesn't know anything. Gao Yin, who was standing aside, suddenly reacted as if he had just woken up from a dream, and he directly knelt in front of Qin Xinglan, begging bitterly. The triple evil's celestial root, the body that brings disaster to the world. Qin Xinglan didn't look at Gao Yin at all. His eyes were fixed on Gao Jin, and he almost spat out 4 words from between his teeth. You must not let him live. Chapter 45:82. I can't let him live. When these words came out of Qin Xinglan's mouth, the killing intent in her eyes could no longer be suppressed. Her entire body was like a ferocious beast, as if she would pounce out in the next moment and directly tear the 6-year-old boy in front of her into pieces. Brother, I'm afraid. Gao Jin was frightened by Qin Xinglan's sudden action and cried. He subconsciously hid behind Gao Yin. However, Qin Xinglan directly stretched out her big hand, not caring that Gao Jin was just a child. She grabbed him like a sharp claw. Stop! At this moment, a low shout was heard. A figure took a step forward. The sword intent around him was furious. The invisible momentum rolled like waves and forced Qin Xinglan to step back several meters. Qin Xinglan directly sat on the ground and looked extremely embarrassed. Nie Tianyu. Qin Xinglan reacted very quickly. She instantly stood up and looked at Nie Tian cold. After a pause, she said seriously, This is the Feng Tian sect's business. Please don't interfere. Gao Yin, what's going on? Nie Tian glanced at Qin Xinglan and ignored her. Instead, he asked Gao Yin in a deep voice. Although he had already guessed it, he couldn't be sure. He had to ask Gao Yin to explain in person. Gao Yin looked at Qin Xinglan in horror and hesitated to speak. She's going to kill you, brother. Why are you still looking at her? Nie Tian's face darkened, and he said cold. Gao Yin looked terrible and couldn't say a word. Since he doesn't dare to say it, you do it. Nie Tian glanced at Gao Yin and then turned to Qin Xinglan and said. Qin Xinglan calmed down a lot. She let out a long sigh and said, Gao Jin doesn't have the body of fire spirit, but the immortal root of 3 evils. Make it clear. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he said in a deep voice, The immortal root is the most important in cultivation. Qin Xinglan seemed to be a little afraid of Nie Tian. She explained, Among the immortal roots, the most powerful ones are called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spirits, 1 absolute, 2 sins, 3 evils, 4 annihilations, and 5 spirits. However, apart from the 5 spirits, the 1 absolute, 2 sins, 3 evils, and 4 annihilations are all forbidden bodies, in other words, immortal roots that bring calamity to the world. And his immortal root, Qin Xinglan looked at Gao Jin and said, is one of the legendary 3 evils' immortal roots, the heavenly lonely evil body. The moment he mentioned the heavenly lonely evil body, Qin Xinglan's eyes were full of killing intent again. You want to kill him just because of this? Nie Tian didn't think much of it. He frowned slightly and asked indifferently. Lonely sky, fiend physique. Immortal root that brings calamity to the world. He will definitely bring calamity to the immortal Qi continent in the future. Qin Xinglan was stunned at first, and then said fiercely, Future? Nie Tian smiled and asked again, Because he didn't do anything wrong. You want to kill him? Lonely sky, fiend physique, lonely star fate. If we let him live, even we will die because of him. Qin Xinglan's expression was a bit strange. She didn't expect Nie Tian to be so calm and tried to explain. She thought that it might be because Nie Tian wasn't from the divine Qi continent, so he couldn't understand how terrifying the lonely sky fiend physique was. However, the lonely star fate was a predestined fate. It was destined that everyone who came into contact with it would die because of it. Lonely star fate? Nie Tian laughed coldly when he heard these words, as if he had heard a joke. What are you laughing at? Qin Xinglan was surprised. Obviously, she didn't expect Nie Tian to be so indifferent. What if I tell you that I'm a fiend god who doesn't allow the fate of heaven and earth? Nie Tian twitched the corner of his mouth and said, I've never believed in fate. If fate is real, then won't heaven and earth die because of me? You. Qin Xinglan was stunned. Obviously, she didn't expect Nie Tian to say such a thing. You said that this child has an immortal root that brings calamity to the world. What do you have to do with fate? Nie Tianling laughed and said, a person's fate is in his own hands. What does it have to do with fate? This child is just a little more talented, but you regard him as a disaster and want to kill him. Don't you know that it's your desire to kill that makes him want to resist? It also makes him hate this world. Even his killing in the future is because of you. In this world, there's no natural good or evil. No matter how evil a person is, there's always a good side, and no matter how good a person is, there's always an evil side. And Gao Jin is just a child. He doesn't have a complete concept of good and evil. If you kill him, you'll be the biggest evil person. I won't allow it. Qin Xinglan looked at Nie Tian and felt the determination in his eyes. She couldn't help but be stunned and didn't speak for a long time. Gao Yan was also stunned. Obviously, he didn't expect that Nie Tian would directly fight against Qin Xinglan. Originally, Nie Tian had nothing to do with this matter, and he could have just stood by and watched. But he actually intervened, which was really unexpected. After all, Nie Tian still had a favor to ask of Qin Xinglan, and he still had to visit the Feng Tian sect. But what he did now was going against the Feng Tian sect. Although Gao Jin was young, he could also see that Nie Tian was protecting him. His eyes flashed with a strange light, as if he was thinking about something. Nie Tian, even if I want to let Gao Jin go, the Feng Tian sect will never give up. After a while, Qin Xinglan calmed down and looked at Gao Yan. He said, not long ago, a disciple of the Feng Tian sect was tested to be an evil spirit, and he was executed on the spot. Master, are you talking about Han Meng? Gao Yan immediately thought of someone and couldn't help but ask. Yes. Qin Xinglan nodded. This. Gao Yan's expression changed. He said, Han Meng is the grandson of the Inquisitor. Yes. Qin Xinglan sighed and said bitterly, the evil spirit that Han Meng tested was far less powerful than the Sky Evil body. But even so, he still had to be executed, even if he was the grandson of the Inquisitor. The Inquisitor was one of the 3 immortals of the Feng Tian sect. The Feng Tian immortal was in seclusion, and everything in the Feng Tian sect was managed by the 3 immortals. Han Meng was the grandson of the Inquisitor, but once his immortal root was found to be an evil spirit, he would still be executed on the spot. This showed how strict the Feng Tian sect's rules were. Since the Feng Tian sect didn't even care about Han Meng's identity, how could they let Gao Jin go? Moreover, Gao Jin's immortal root was one of the 3 evils, which was far superior to the average immortal root of an evil spirit. Gao Yan certainly understood the meaning of Qin Xinglan's words. His face was as pale as wax, not to mention how ugly he was. No matter what, the Feng Tian sect won't let Gao Jin go. Qin Xinglan glanced at Gao Jin and said, if I bring Gao Jin back to the sect now, I might be able to leave his corpse intact. You can't take him away with me here. Nie Tian said coldly and stood in front of Gao Jin. Nie Tian, you've just arrived at the Deity Qi continent, so you don't understand what the 3 evils immortal root means. This isn't something you can meddle in. Don't get involved in this mess, okay? Qin Xinglan took a deep breath and almost begged Nie Tian. She didn't want to go against Nie Tian. He had saved her life before, and she had a good impression of him. But Gao Jin's matter was too big. If Nie Tian insisted on interfering, he would only lose his life. I'm sorry, but I'm going to interfere with Gao Jin's matter. Nie Tian's eyes darkened as he spoke calmly. He wasn't afraid, and he wasn't going to give in. Chapter 45:83. I'll take care of it. Nie Tian's words took Qin Xinglan aback, and she went blank for a moment. She didn't expect that Nie Tian would be so determined to protect Gao Jin. Nie Tian, I know you're powerful, but with all due respect, you can't fight against the whole Feng Tian sect alone, Qin Xinglan said in a low voice after she calmed down completely. Only the 3 of us know that Gao Jin has the 3 evils fairy root. Gao Yan and I won't tell anyone, and I believe Master Qin won't either. Nie Tian raised his eyebrows and said, since we won't tell anyone, how will the Feng Tian sect know? Tian, what do you mean? Qin Qinglan frowned and her face darkened. She had made the biggest concession by not taking Gao Jin away, but Tian still wanted her to keep the secret. It was outrageous. Tian stared coldly at Qin Qinglan, a hint of killing intent rising in his eyes. Master Qin, I saved your life, so you'll keep a secret from me. That's not too much, is it? You? Qin Qinglan keenly sensed the killing intent in Tian's eyes. She was shocked and couldn't say anything for a while. No, that means you agree. Tian smiled and didn't want to say anything more. No. Qin Qinglan's eyes trembled violently, and she said, I can't do that. If I hide this and cause trouble with the acquired evil body, wouldn't I be a sinner of the sect? Tian's eyes grew grim. Qin Qinglan was indeed stubborn when it came to predestination. After a moment of pondering, Tian looked at Gao Yin and asked, Gao Yin, do you want your brother to live? Yes, of course. Gao Yin replied without hesitation. Okay, then listen to me. Tian nodded and said to Qin Qinglan, Master Qin, you just need to keep the secret from me. When I return from my visit to the Fengtian sect, I will take Gao Jin away and never return to the immortal Qi continent. Hearing Tian's words, Gao Yin and Qin Qinglan changed their expressions at the same time. Gao Yin didn't expect Tian's solution to be like this. Qin Qinglan, however, hadn't expected Tian to be so bold. What if I don't agree? After a while, Qin Qinglan came to her senses. Her eyes suddenly flashed, and she stared at Tian and asked, Then I have no choice but to kill you. Tian said word by word without avoiding Qin Qinglan's gaze. Qin Qinglan was overwhelmed with shock, and she actually became absent-minded for a moment. She retreated a few steps and almost fell down. Tian's eyes were really too frightening. Even if it was just a flash of killing intent, it gave people a cold feeling as if they had fallen into an ice house. I will keep it a secret. After a while, Qin Qinglan recovered and nodded. Very well. I believe that Master Qin is a man of his word. Tian smiled faintly and secretly let out a sigh of relief. He didn't want to kill Qin Qinglan, but if he was forced to do so, he would also kill a flower. Fortunately, Qin Qinglan was not a bad person. She didn't push things to the extreme. It's already late today. We will go back to the Fengtian sect tomorrow morning, Qin Qinglan said wearily, looking a little tired. Okay. Tian agreed. After saying goodbye to Gao Yin, he directly left. Tian. Looking at Tian's back, Qin Qinglan shouted his name in her heart. Since she set foot on the path of cultivation, she had never been so embarrassed as she was today. Even when facing the killing intent of the man in black not long ago, she could still keep calm. However, in the face of Tian, she completely panicked. She couldn't explain it clearly. There seemed to be a kind of momentum around Tian, which made people unable to help but obey. Master, Gao Yin looked at Qin Qinglan and was about to speak, but was interrupted by her. Don't worry. Since I have promised to keep it a secret, I will not tell anyone. Qin Qinglan's eyes were deep, and she looked even more tired. Thank you, Master. Gao Yin nodded and silently led Gao Jin into the room. Under the curtain of the night, only Qin Qinglan was left, looking a little lonely. Early the next morning, Tian came to the small courtyard of the Gao family with Qing Qi and Mo Rushi. Qin Qinglan looked at Qing Qi and Mo Rushi, who were standing behind Tian, and asked coldly, Who are they? This is my friend Qing Qi, and this is my wife Mo Rushi. They will go to the Fengtian sect with me. Tian didn't avoid the topic and introduced them lightly. Qin Qinglan frowned slightly. She glanced at Qing Qi, and then her eyes fell on Mo Rushi. She admitted that although she was not a beauty that could cause the downfall of a city, her facial features could still be considered elegant. However, at this moment, she had to admit that Mo Rushi made her feel a sense of inferiority. Among all the women she had seen, Mo Rushi's appearance was definitely in the top 3, even if she was not the most beautiful. Moreover, Mo Rushi's beauty had a kind of otherworldly feeling, like an orchid in an empty valley, fresh and unique. Let's go. Qin Xinglan nodded and walked in the front. This time, Gallion didn't go back to the Fengtian sect with Nie Tian and the others. Instead, he stayed in Gaoyu Village to deal with the upcoming battle between Gaoyu Village and Feng Village. As for the battle between the two villages, Nie Tian didn't intend to intervene. It was better to let Gao Yin and the others handle it themselves. After leaving Gaoyu Village with Nie Tian and the others, Qin Xinglan went straight to the Fengtian sect. Soon, the four of them came to the entrance of the Fengtian sect. You guys step back a little. Qin Xinglan stood outside the invisible door and motioned for Nie Tian and the others to step back. Nie Tian and the others stepped aside. Qin Shi looked at Qin Xinglan curiously, wanting to see how the latter opened the invisible door. Qin Xinglan took out a jade token and activated the immortal power in his palm. The jade token released a ray of light, which hit the center of the invisible door. Boom! Suddenly, a mysterious force was released, and the invisible door opened. Please. Qin Xinglan nodded and let Nie Tian and the others enter. Thank you. Nie Tian answered and was the first to walk in. This time, there was no obstruction, and they easily entered the door. Mo Rushi and Qing Qi immediately followed, and Qin Xinglan was the last to enter. After entering, Nie Tian immediately felt that there was a mysterious force flowing in the space around him. It was somewhat similar to the nine-elemental force, but not the same. It seemed to be purer and gentler. Is this the aura of immortal power? Nie Tian murmured. He couldn't help but feel a little excited. The Fengtian sect is isolated from the outside world. The immortal power within the sect is several times denser than in the outside world. It's not surprising that you can feel the aura of immortal power. Qin Xinglan glanced at Nie Tian and said lightly, "So that's how it is." Nie Tian smiled. He had thought that his perception had improved. Next, under Qin Xinglan's lead, Nie Tian and the others soon arrived at the immortal field of the Fengtian sect. The immortal field was not big and had a radius of about 1,000 meters. There were many cultivators in immortal robes sitting in the field. They were probably cultivating. What's that above their heads? Nie Tian asked curiously when he saw that there was something like a vortex above the heads of the cultivators in the immortal field. It's the immortal palace. Qin Xinglan responded cold. Just as she was about to leave with Nie Tian and the others, she suddenly felt something and her pretty face changed. Chapter 4584. Qin Xinglan's pretty face suddenly changed. She turned around and saw a familiar face, which made her look gloomy. It's this guy. Nie Tian followed Qin Xinglan's gaze, and his heart sank. He was no stranger to the person walking towards him. It was Liang Zhao, the person who had appeared at Gao Yan's house not long ago and wanted to forcibly test Gao Jin's celestial foundation. Liang Zhao walked over leisurely, as if he didn't see Nie Tian. He fixed his eyes on Qin Xinglan and said with a meaningful smile, "What? Aren't you happy to see me? You and I have nothing to do with each other anymore. It doesn't matter if you're happy or not." Qin Xinglan replied cold and walked away. Qin Xinglan, when we were together, you couldn't wait to see me every day. Now, even if we're separated, we are still fellow disciples. Do you have to be so heartless? Liang Zhao twitched the corner of his mouth and said lightly. His words made Qin Xinglan's body freeze. She stopped and turned around. Liang Zhao, I don't want to talk about what happened in the past anymore. I hope you won't bring it up either. Qin Xinglan's eyes were cold as she spoke in a deep voice. Her eyes clearly belonged to a woman who had been deeply hurt. Seeing this, Nie Tian could not help but realize that there was such a relationship between the two. No wonder Liang Zhao had been focusing on Qin Xinglan and did not even notice the existence of Nie Tian. It was probably because of Qin Xinglan that Liang Zhao had appeared at Gao's house and wanted to forcibly test Gao Jin's celestial foundation. Qin Xinglan, you're really heartless. Liang Zhao's face darkened and became cold. He suddenly turned his eyes and noticed the existence of Nie Tian. His eyes trembled violently, and he said in surprise, "It's you?" "Yes, it's me." Nie Tian smiled faintly. He was calm and indifferent. "How dare you come to the Fengtian sect?" Liang Zhao did not expect Nie Tian to be so calm. He immediately became angry and growled. What does Master Liang mean by this? Why can't I come to the Feng Tian sect? Nye Tian frowned in confusion. You've injured a disciple of the Feng Tian sect, yet you're still so arrogant. You're clearly looking down on the Feng Tian sect. Liang Zhao was still somewhat rational. His expression was incomparably gloomy, but he did not dare to make any moves. He knew Nye Tian's strength, so he didn't dare to take the risk when there was no chance of winning. If he were to lose to Nye Tian in front of so many disciples in the Feng Tian sect, it would be a great humiliation. Nye Tian, what's going on? How do you know him? Qin Xinglan didn't know the situation, so she couldn't help but frown and ask coldly. Nye Tian smiled and briefly told him what happened at Gao Yan's house. Back at Gao Yan's house, because of Gao Jin's Sansha immortal root, he had actually forgotten about Liang Zhao. After listening, Qin Xinglan's pretty face was full of coldness, not for Nye Tian, but for Liang Zhao. Liang Zhao, I think you're the one who has the guts. Qin Xinglan's pretty face was gloomy, and she asked coldly, Gao Jin's immortal root test is a task assigned to me by the sect. Why do you have to overstep your authority? It's just a simple immortal root test. I was passing by Gaoyu village, so I did it for you. What's the matter? Liang Zhao responded, still unwilling to let go of Nye Tian. He pointed at Nye Tian and said, but this guy hurt my disciple and provoked the Feng Tian sect. He's really arrogant. Facing the furious Liang Zhao, Nye Tian smiled and said, Liang Zhao, when you appeared at Gao Yan's house, you were not entrusted by the Feng Tian sect, but your own will. So at that time, you couldn't represent the Feng Tian sect. I hurt your disciple because they attacked me first. Just because they are disciples of the Feng Tian sect, should I be beaten without moving? Liang Zhao, I must report this matter to the interrogator and let him make a fair decision. Before Liang Zhao could respond, Qin Xinglan continued. Moreover, on my way to Gaoyu village, I was ambushed by men in black. The 5 disciples who went with me were all killed. What? You were ambushed? Hearing Qin Xinglan's words, Liang Zhao couldn't help but change his expression. He was extremely surprised. Nye Tian frowned, and it seemed that Liang Zhao's reaction was not fake. It seemed that the ambush of Qin Xinglan had nothing to do with Liang Zhao. Liang Zhao, you arrived at the Gao family before me, and tried to force Gao Jin to do the immortal root test. After you failed, you returned to the sect and pestered me. It's hard not to connect the ambush of me with you. Qin Xinglan sneered and looked at Liang Zhao coldly. Liang Zhao was suddenly at a loss for words, and his expression was extremely ugly. At this time, many disciples of the Feng Tian sect gathered around. Obviously, they all knew Qin Xinglan and Liang Zhao. Seeing them like this, they couldn't help but murmur. What's wrong with Master Liang and Master Qin? Why are they fighting? I heard that Master Liang and Master Qin used to have a relationship, but Master Liang fell in love with someone else, so they didn't get together. It turns out that they have such a past. They won't fight, will they? Everyone was discussing in low voices, and it was obvious that they were watching a good show. Liang Zhao, this is not over. Qin Xinglan ignored the crowd. He looked at Liang Zhao coldly, then turned around and left. Nye Tian and the others naturally didn't want to stay any longer, so they immediately followed him. Stop! However, right at this moment, a cold shout rang out, and a white-clothed figure walked out from the crowd. His eyes were like a hawk's, releasing a sharp glint as he stared at Nye Tian. Nye Tian frowned and couldn't help but look at the figure in white. This was a young man in his 20s. He was dressed in white and had an elegant demeanor. His facial features were handsome and resolute, and his heroic spirit was compelling. Only his pair of eyes were a little gloomy, and people couldn't help but stay away from him. For some reason, this man in front of him made Nye Tian feel uneasy. The appearance of the man in white made the crowd restless. Look, isn't that by Zixian? It's really him. He is one of the top 10 geniuses of the Feng Tian sect. He entered the 4th realm before the age of 20. It's really terrifying. I heard that Bai Zixian went out for training. When did he come back? Everyone was discussing, and their eyes were filled with unconcealable envy when they looked at Bai Zixian. He was one of the top 10 geniuses of the Fengtian sect, a real god's favored one, and might even become a grand celestial in the future. Who wouldn't be envious of him? It turns out that he is a genius of the immortal Tao. Nye Tian felt a little uneasy in his heart, but his face was very calm. He asked with a smile, "What's the matter? Who are you?" Bai Zixian's eyes were sharp like two sharp blades, as if they were going to pierce through people. He asked in a deep voice, "Does this have anything to do with you?" Nye Tian smiled. He felt that Bai Zixian must have discovered something. "If you're an ordinary person, it naturally has nothing to do with me." Bai Zixian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he said, "But you don't belong to the Xianqi continent. You're from the outside world, so you must have come to the Fengtian sect for a reason." Chapter 4585. Nye Tian's eyes darkened when he heard Bai Zixian's words. He didn't expect the other party to be able to tell that he wasn't from the immortal Qi continent at such a young age. It seemed that Bai Zixian, as a genius of the immortal Tao, had some tricks up his sleeve. Bai Zixian's words stirred the crowd. Bai Zixian said that this guy isn't from the immortal Qi continent. What does that mean? If he's not from the immortal Qi continent, then where is he from? What is Bai Zixian talking about? Why can't I understand? Among the crowd, many people's knowledge of the world had always been limited to the immortal Qi continent. They never knew that there were other worlds outside of the immortal Qi continent. Although the immortal Qi continent wasn't vast, there were still many unexplored areas. Many people even thought that the immortal Qi continent was a boundless continent. They were naturally surprised when they heard Bai Zixian say that Nye Tian was from another world. "You're right. I'm not from the immortal Qi continent." Nye Tian smiled. "I came to the Fengtian sect only to pay a visit to the supreme, immortal sovereign. I don't have any ulterior motives." "Is that so?" Bai Zixian sneered, suspicion written all over his face. The Fengtian sect was a prominent existence in the immortal Tao. Which person who came to the Fengtian sect didn't come for the Fengtian sect's superior cultivation techniques? Moreover, Nye Tian was from the outside world, so he must be very interested in the path of immortal cultivation. Nye Tian's answer caused the crowd's expressions to change. They burst into laughter and looked at Nye Tian as if they were looking at a fool. This guy must be an idiot. Who does he think he is? How can he meet the supreme immortal sovereign so easily? He's indeed a fool from the outside world. He doesn't even know the most basic rules of the Fengtian sect. Not to mention him, even us disciples of the Fengtian sect aren't qualified to meet the supreme immortal sovereign. The Fengtian immortal was the supreme existence of the Fengtian sect. Naturally, not everyone could meet him. Nye Tian opened his mouth and said that he was here to pay a visit to the high immortal venerable. Of course, it attracted everyone's ridicule. Nye Tian only smiled in the face of the mockery and ridicule from all around. He didn't care at all. He had seen this kind of expression many times. They were just a bunch of idiots. There was no need to bother about it. "Boy, I don't care why you came to the Fengtian sect. I just want to tell you that the Fengtian sect doesn't welcome you. Please leave immediately." Bai Zixian's eyes darkened. He didn't want to talk nonsense with Nye Tian anymore, so he said directly. Nye Tian's expression sank after sensing Bai Zixian's determination. He no longer held back and said, "Your name is Bai Zixian, right? Even if you are a genius of the Fengtian sect, you can't represent the entire Fengtian sect. The person I want to see is the high immortal venerable, not you. Why do you have to make me leave?" "Because I'm stronger than you." Bai Zixian's eyes narrowed slightly. He took a step forward, and a burst of aura immediately spread out, causing the surrounding time and space to stagnate. It was as if an invisible force had locked the space, making people feel a strong sense of oppression. Nye Tian frowned a little. Sword Qi came out spontaneously, and an invisible sharp and fierce force broke through the void, instantly dispelling the pressure of the void. "Huh?" Bai Zixian's expression suddenly changed, unable to conceal the surprise in his heart. Obviously, he didn't expect that Nye Tian would have such strength. Nye Tian's action made everyone's eyes lit up, and they immediately became excited. "I can't tell. This guy is so young, but his strength can't be underestimated. He can actually fight Byzetian head-on. Byzetian broke through to the 4th stage Celestial Lord a few years ago. This time, when he returned from the outside world, he should at least be an Earth stage Celestial Lord. Earth stage Celestial Lord? I think Byzetian's cultivation should be at least a Heaven stage Celestial Lord. This silver-haired boy doesn't look like a good person. Let's see if he is a match for Byzetian. Everyone spoke one after another. Obviously, they didn't intend to let go of this opportunity to watch a good show. Of course, they knew that in addition to Byzetian's outstanding talent, he was also arrogant and unyielding. He had never been submissive to anyone. How could he lower his head to a person from the outside world? Byzetian, I brought Nye Tian into the sect. Please don't make things difficult for him. At this time, Qin Xinglan couldn't stand it anymore, so she stepped forward and said, although she didn't like Nye Tian, he had saved her life after all. She still knew how to repay his kindness. Byzetian looked at Qin Xinglan cold and said in a deep voice, if you don't want to be embarrassed, step aside. Qin Xinglan's beautiful eyes trembled, and her small mouth was wide open. Obviously, she didn't expect that Byzetian would refute her in public. Byzetian was indeed a genius, but no matter how strong he was just a disciple. Qin Xinglan's status was not high, but she was still an elder. Moreover, she was an elder, so she shouldn't be ignored like this. In fact, in Byzetian's opinion, he had been very polite. If it wasn't for Qin Xinglan's status as an elder, he would have directly asked her to get lost. Byzetian, are you sure you're stronger than me? Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he nodded at Qin Xinglan with a smile, indicating that she should not interfere again. Then, he turned to look at Byzetian and said, of course. Byzetian's eyes flashed with confidence. Obviously, he was full of confidence. This time, after returning from the trial, his strength had greatly increased, and he had reached the peak of the 4th stage Heaven stage Immortal Realm. He might even step into the 5th stage Immortal Realm at any time. Such talent was rare in the entire Immortal Qi continent, and Nye Tian, who seemed to be about the same age as him, had the strength to fight against Immortal stage Immortal Realm. Well, I'll give you a chance. Nye Tian smiled and lightly stepped on the ground. Sword Qi overflowed, and he drew a 1-meter square circle on the ground. He said, I'm standing in this circle. You have to make 3 moves. If you can force me out of the circle, you win, and I'll leave the Fengtian sect immediately. If you can't, get lost. His deep voice was filled with unconcealable arrogance and contempt. Everyone was shocked, and then they couldn't help but discuss. Is this guy crazy? How dare he look down on Byzetian like this? The circle under his feet is only 1 meter square. He can easily push it out. Sure enough, he's a fool from the outside world. He doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He's really courting death. Qin Xinglan was also stunned. She didn't expect Nye Tian to be so arrogant. Although she had seen Nye Tian's strength with her own eyes, she didn't believe that Nye Tian could take 3 moves from Byzetian in a 1 meter square circle. One should know that Byzetian was a genius of the immortal Tao. His strength was probably stronger than many immortals of the previous generation. However, Qing Qi and Mo Rushi weren't nervous at all. Instead, they were smiling. Obviously, they were very confident in Nye Tian. Boy, you asked for it. It was the first time that Byzetian was looked down upon like this. He was furious. His immortal force surged around him, and he growled, I only need 1 move to kill you. Boom! As soon as his voice fell, Byzetian slapped out with his palm. His immortal force rolled out and formed the shape of a dragon and tiger in the void. The roar of the dragon and tiger rang in everyone's ears. Chapter 4586. Byzetian was completely infuriated by Nye Tian's arrogance and directly attacked. The immortal force around his body erupted, engulfing heaven and earth. Roaring dragon, roar, tiger palm. Someone immediately recognized Byzetian's palm technique and cried out in shock. It turned out that Byzetian used a set of basic palm technique of the Fengtian sect, called Roaring Dragon, Roar Tiger Palm. When mastered, The sound of roaring dragon and tiger could be heard in the void. Although roaring dragon roar tiger palm was only a set of basic palm technique, it was not easy to completely master it. Most people, immersed in it for a lifetime, would not be able to reach the acme of perfection, so there would not be the sound of roaring dragon and tiger. But when Byzetian attacked, the roaring dragon and tiger pierced the ears. Obviously, he had practiced this set of palm technique to the acme of perfection. Moreover, when he attacked, he directly used his full strength without any scruples. At this time, everyone could see that Byzetian did not want to force Nietian out of the circle at all. He clearly wanted to take Nietian's life. But Nietian, in the face of the palm that threatened his life, was cold and fearless. His body was like a mountain, and he was as still as a bell. Everyone's eyes trembled, and their expressions clearly said, "Is this guy crazy?" In the face of Byzetian's full-strength palm, Nietian did not dodge, and did not even move to defend. Was he not courting death? Bang! In the next moment, the surging palm force fell, and after a muffled sound, the roaring dragon and tiger came to an abrupt end. Byzetian's body seemed to be impacted, and he slightly swayed, then immediately stood firm. Looking at Nietian, he did not move at all, and there was still a confident and contemptuous smile hanging on the corner of his mouth. This! Everyone's eyes trembled violently, and they all gasped, looking at the silver-haired young man in front of them with incomparable horror, completely speechless. How is this possible? Byzetian screamed in horror. His originally masculine voice became shrill. His full-strength palm strike caught Nietian off guard, and he resisted it with his body, but he was not injured at all. This was really too terrifying. It should be known that even the opponent, an Earth-stage celestial venerable, would not dare to be careless with this palm. Could it be that Nietian already possesses the strength of a heaven-rank immortal exalt? But this was absolutely impossible. Nietian looked to be in his early 20s, and it was utterly impossible for him to have a cultivation at the heaven rank. There weren't many heaven-rank immortal venerables in the entire immortal Chi continent, let alone a mere outsider like Nietian. This is your power? The corner of Nietian's mouth twitched. He didn't hide his disdain at all. Coldly, he spat out 4 words, "A mess." "You?" Byzetian's complexion changed, and he was so angry that he almost vomited blood. "Continue. You still have 2 more moves." Nietian was a little impatient and said coldly. He admitted that Byzetian did have some talent and strength, but he was still far from being able to injure him. Nietian didn't have the strength of a heaven-rank immortal venerable, but his martial body wasn't any weaker than a heaven-rank immortal venerable. He had long discovered that the strength of cultivators might not be weaker than martial artists, but their bodies were far weaker than martial artists. Even though the current Nietian didn't have his 10th lifeline, his martial body was still far from being comparable to martial artists of the same level. It was precisely because of this that Nietian easily withstood Byzetian's palm strike. "Kid, you've angered me." Byzetian suddenly calmed down. His eyes were cold and murderous as he spoke in a low voice. "I've angered many people. You won't make a difference." The corner of Nietian's mouth twitched. Although he didn't show any fear on the surface, he was a little more cautious in his heart. A genius like Byzetian definitely had a side that surpassed others. Perhaps he still had a trump card that he hadn't used yet. Very well. Byzetian's eyes were gloomy and his voice was hoarse. He moved his palms at the same time, and immortal force circulated around his body. Suddenly, an unusual aura was released. His palms were covered with a layer of flame, but it didn't feel scorching at all. Instead, it made people feel kind of cold and white chill. When the onlookers saw this scene, they obviously also felt the unusual aura, and their faces all changed. "It's Byzetian's immortal spirit," someone exclaimed. Obviously, they didn't expect that Byzetian would even use immortal spirit. Immortal spirit? Nietian's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't have the slightest fear, but was a little curious. Not long ago, when Qin Xinglan tested Gao Jin's immortal root, Gao Jin had explained that the immortal root test mainly consisted of three aspects: immortal palace, celestial elephant, and immortal spirit. And just now, Nie Tian saw that the immortals who were cultivating in the immortal ground all had a group of vortexes floating above their heads, which was their immortal palace. At this moment, Bai Zixian took the initiative to release immortal spirit, so that Nie Tian had a better understanding of immortal cultivators. Nie Tian speculated that the so-called immortal spirit of immortal cultivators should be similar to the original spirit of martial artists, which was the manifestation of the power in their bodies. Bai Zixian, quickly put away your immortal spirit. Qin Xinglan was a little anxious at this time and shouted in a low voice. Boy, the second move. Bai Zixian didn't pay attention to Qin Xinglan at all. His eyes were fixed on Nie Tian, as if the latter was his father's murderer. Bai Zixian, are you crazy? Qin Xinglan was very frightened and shouted. However, it was too late. Boom! Bai Zixian slapped his palm, and the immortal spirit flame whistled through the air, condensed into a line of fire in the air, and then instantly soared, pressing down on Nie Tian with the momentum of the sky. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and his mind moved. The chaotic flame operated, and a layer of flame shield appeared around his body. The next moment, the rolling flame fell, but after touching the shield around Nie Tian, it was like a clay ox entering the sea, unable to hurt Nie Tian at all. Impossible! Bai Zixian was shocked by the scene in front of him, and then he screamed. His immortal spirit, the cold bone flame, did not cause any harm to Nie Tian. How is this possible? The others were also shocked, and they couldn't speak for a long time. Your immortal spirit is good, but it's still far from being able to break my chaotic flame. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said directly, there's still the third move. What else do you have? Just use it. Bai Zixian froze in place, like a fool. Although his lips were twitching, he couldn't make a sound. Everyone looked at Bai Zixian, who was in a daze, and many people started whispering. Bai Zixian used the immortal spirit, but he still couldn't force this person out of the circle. It's really embarrassing. It's more than embarrassing. The cost of using the immortal spirit is too high. The immortal spirit is the foundation of a cultivator's celestial path. How can it be used at will? Alas, this time Bai Zixian really kicked an iron plate. The crowd was talking, and they looked at Bai Zixian with sympathy in their eyes, but more of it was sneering. For a cultivator, the immortal spirit was like a martial artist's vital meridian. The cost of using the immortal spirit was extremely high. Not only would it consume the cultivator's lifespan, but it would also damage the celestial path's foundation and even cause the cultivator's celestial path talent to decline. This time, Bai Zixian really suffered great loss. I've lost. After a long while, Bai Zixian gave Nie Tian a frustrated look. It was as if he had used up all of his strength to say those three simple words. The Feng Tian Sect's celestial path genius did not even use the third move and directly admitted defeat. Chapter 4587. Bai Zixian admitted defeat. This scene caused everyone present to be stunned in unison, and they stared at Bai Zixian with their mouths agape. Who would have thought that the arrogant genius of the immortal cultivation circle would admit defeat without even using the third move? Qin Xinglan was also flabbergasted. She looked at Nie Tian with unconcealable fear in her eyes. Although she had seen Nie Tian fight and had a certain understanding of his strength, she was still shocked at this moment. Bai Zixian used the celestial spirit, which was supposed to be a lose-lose strategy. Unexpectedly, it didn't affect Nie Tian at all. Qin Xinglan suddenly had a feeling that Nie Tian was like a boundless, bottomless ocean. She was very sure that if she didn't accept Nie Tian's proposal at that time, he would really kill her. On the other side, Liang Zhao finally came to his senses, but he was already in a cold sweat unconsciously. He was very lucky that he didn't fight with Nie Tian at that time. Otherwise, his end would definitely be much worse than Bai Zixian's. After a short moment, under the gazes of everyone that sighed with emotion, Bai Zixian left in a desolate manner. His figure was disappearing while his footsteps staggered, and he'd lost the spirit and arrogance he had earlier. Yet Tian frowned, and there was a touch of bitterness at the corner of his mouth. He had seen many talented people, but once they suffered a huge blow, they couldn't recover. He hoped that Bai Zixian was not such a fragile genius. Master Qin, let's go. Nie Tian ignored the gaze of others and looked at Qin Xinglan. Qin Xinglan seemed to wake up from a dream. She nodded and walked ahead to lead the way. Master Qin, I just heard those people say that the celestial spirit is very important to the cultivators and can't be used at will, right? On the way, Qin Chi couldn't help asking. Obviously, he was very curious about the cultivators. Yes. Qin Xinglan nodded and said, the celestial palace, the celestial elephant, and the celestial spirit are called the three celestial roots of the immortals. Among them, the celestial palace is also called the celestial root, the celestial elephant is also called the earth immortal root, and the celestial spirit is also called the human immortal root. The celestial root is the celestial palace, which represents the luck and comprehension of the celestial power of the immortals. The earth immortal root is also known as the immortal elephant. It represents the strength of an immortal's body and the ability to absorb and fuse immortal force. The mortal immortal root, also known as the immortal spirit, represents the life force and talent of an immortal. In a way, it also affects the immortal Tao foundation of an immortal. Because immortal essences are extremely important, immortals wouldn't use immortal essences unless they had no other choice. Once they do, then not only would it harm their vitality, it might even harm their foundation in the immortal Tao. When he spoke up to hear, Qin Xinglan clearly thought of Bai Zixian, and he couldn't help but sigh. He said, he's still too young, and he's too impulsive. Otherwise, he wouldn't have suffered such an unexpected calamity today. So that's what the three great immortal roots mean. Qin Chi was obviously not interested in Qin Xinglan's last words. He nodded and seemed to be thinking about something. Master Qin, I feel that the young man called Bai Zixian is not an undeserved calamity. Mo Rushi, who was standing on the side, said lightly, with his temperament, even if he didn't provoke Nie Tian today, he would have provoked others in the future. Nie Tian is not a person who fights bravely. Just now, he was just passively injured. If Bai Zixian had encountered someone else, he might not have ended up like this. Moreover, what happened today may not be a bad thing for him. If he can learn from it, it will definitely be of great benefit to his future immortal cultivation. When Qin Xinglan heard Mo Rushi's words, she couldn't help but frown, looking a little surprised. She didn't expect that Mo Rushi, who looked as elegant as an orchid, would suddenly say such a thing. Even though Mo Rushi's words exonerated Nie Tian, what she said was not without reason. Whether it's immortal cultivation or martial arts cultivation, it's often not talent that determines a person's achievements, but temperament and perseverance. At this time, Nie Tian also said, with Bai Zixian's current temperament, even if his talent is improved to a higher level, his future achievements will be limited. But if he can walk out of today's blow, restrain his arrogance, and regain his spirit, his future will be limitless. Qin Xinglan's eyes flickered, and she was stunned for a moment, not knowing how to respond to Nie Tian. For a moment, she couldn't adapt to the fact that there was such a profound side to Nie Tian under such an arrogant appearance. Perhaps arrogance was just Nie Tian's appearance, and unfathomable was his real heart. After a while, Qin Xinglan and Nie Tian came to a magnificent hall. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he keenly perceived that there was a layer of immortal force surging outside the hall, which was obviously protected by an immortal formation. At this time, they stood outside the hall, and in front of them were thousands of stone steps. Nie Tian, you wait here first. I'll go and report to the Inquisitor. Qin Xinglan gestured for Nitan and the others to stop, and then she walked up the stone steps and soon entered the hall. It seems that the rules of the Fengtian sect are very strict. Looking at the hall in front of him, Nie Tian could not help but smile bitterly. Even though the Fengtian sect and the All-Heaven Sacred World had countless peaks and peaks, none of them had such a magnificent hall, and none of them needed such strict rules. Qin Chi did not care. His eyes flashed with a fiery light as he stared at the hall, as if he had discovered a new continent. Tian knew that Qin Shi was studying the immortal formation outside the hall. Qin Xinglan entered the hall for a full 2 hours, and then she finally came out. Her pretty face was a little ugly, and it seemed that the negotiation with the Inquisitor did not go well. "Master Qin, how was it?" Seeing that Qin Xinglan had returned, yet Tian had been waiting anxiously for a long time, so he immediately asked. "The Inquisitor asked you to see him alone." Qin Xinglan seemed to be a little nervous and said, "But he doesn't want to talk to you about anything else. He just wants to know about the situation when I was ambushed that day." "Understood." Tian nodded, glanced at Qin Chi and Mo Rushi, and then stepped onto the stone steps in front of him. Tian guessed that Inquisitor Feng Tian probably did not want to see him, but Qin Xinglan mentioned the ambush by the men in black, so Inquisitor Feng Tian was interested to know about it. There were thousands of stone steps, and every step was supported by immortal power. The pressure was so great that even Tian could not help but pant when he stood on the last step. But at least he managed to make it up. Walking quickly to the door of the hall, Tian saw a sage-like figure sitting in the midst of the incense from afar. "Looks like this is Inquisitor Feng Tian." Tian murmured in his heart and walked into the hall step by step, but he did not approach that person. Instead, he bowed from afar and said respectfully, "Junior Tian greets the Inquisitor." Inquisitor Feng Tian's hair and beard were all white. He closed his eyes and did not speak, as if he was asleep. "Junior Tian greets the Inquisitor." Eyebrows furrowed, Tian bowed again. But Inquisitor Feng Tian still did not respond. Tian felt strange and could not help but take a few steps forward. Finally, he saw Inquisitor Feng Tian's face clearly and was suddenly shocked. This face was actually haggard, like that of a zombie, without the slightest trace of blood. Moreover, Tian did not feel the slightest fluctuation of aura from Inquisitor Feng Tian. It seemed that Inquisitor Feng Tian had already passed away. Chapter 45-88. Tian approached the Inquisitor, but he could not feel any aura from the latter. His heart sank, and he was horrified. At this moment, he had a strong feeling that the Inquisitor had passed away. But how was this possible? Qin Xinglan had just left the hall. Junior Tian greets the Inquisitor. Tian did not dare to be careless. He opened his mouth again and stared at the withered old man in front of him, hoping that the latter would have some reaction. But to his disappointment, the Feng Tian Inquisitor didn't move at all. Tian's eyes darkened. He took a deep breath and decided to take a closer look. He came in front of the Inquisitor and saw the latter's appearance clearly. It was a rotten face like that of a zombie. His skin was like a dead leaf, and his bones were clearly visible. He looked like a corpse that had been dead for a long time. "Let's leave first." Tian thought for a while and decided to leave first. He wanted to ask Qin Xinglan what was going on. Phew! Knock, knock, knock. But at this moment, the Inquisitor reacted. He first exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, then coughed. The sound was also very dry, like the sound of knocking on the door. "Lord Inquisitor." Tian was shocked. He looked at the person in front of him and screamed, "You?" The Inquisitor's closed eyes suddenly opened. The moment he saw Tian, he released a ray of light. Then he suddenly stretched out his rotten, wood-like arm, and his withered palm was like an iron clamp, clasping Tian's wrist tightly. "Lord Inquisitor." Tian was taken aback by the sudden turn of events, and he let out another exclamation. Although the Inquisitor was like a withered branch, his arm was still very strong. Even Tian felt that his wrist was going to break. In the next moment, a jade thumb ring appeared in Inquisitor Feng Tian's other hand, and he put it on Tian's thumb without saying a word. "This." Tian was taken aback, a puzzled look on his face. Immediately after, the jade ring seemed to merge with Tian. After flashing a few times, it disappeared. Then, before Tian could react, Inquisitor Feng Tian's body shook and he fell to the ground. He was no longer alive. How could this be? Tian took 2 steps back and looked at the sky Inquisitor who had already passed away. His face was filled with shock and confusion. Things happened too suddenly, causing him to be unable to react for a moment. Hum, buzz, hum. At this moment, a series of deep and powerful bell tolls suddenly sounded from outside the hall, causing everyone to feel a sense of urgency. Oh no! Niet Tion's eyes trembled violently, and he suddenly reacted. His expression changed greatly, and he immediately turned around and dashed out of the hall. Unfortunately, it was too late. Above the hall, an invisible force suddenly spread out, like an invisible net, firmly trapping Niet Tion. Niet Tion dashed left and right, but he could not escape. Then, figures in black descended and surrounded Niet Tion in the blink of an eye. Niet Tion looked at the figures in black around him. Even though he was a little flustered, he forced himself to maintain basic calmness. How dare you kill the Inquisitor? What crime do you deserve? The leading man in black roared angrily. His voice was deafening like the sound of a diamond. Niet Tion's eyes narrowed. He was already prepared, but facing the scene in front of him, he still found it difficult to remain calm. When the sky beacon bell rang, he knew that he might be regarded as the person who killed the Inquisitor. He did not defend himself. He knew that the men in black in front of him did not have the power to punish him. Sure enough, a moment later, a burly figure appeared outside the hall. His aura was like a mountain, and he strode into the hall. Lord Fengji. When the men in black saw him, they all bowed respectfully. Fengji. Niet Tion's eyes narrowed as he carefully looked at the man. It was a middle-aged man. He was extremely burly, at least 2 meters tall. His facial features were as sharp as a knife. Although he had experienced many vicissitudes of life, he still could not hide his heroic spirit. The man in black called him Fengji. It seemed that he was one of the 3 Fengji. Qin Xinglan had said that the Fengtian immortal was in seclusion, and all the affairs of the Fengtian sect were handled by the 3 Fengji. The Inquisitor and Fengji should be the 3 Fengji. Fengji looked gloomy and nodded. He did not look at Niet Tion, but moved to the Inquisitor's corpse. After watching for a long time, Fengji turned around. His eyes were as sharp as blades. He stared at Niet Tion and said cold, "Did you kill the Inquisitor?" "I did not kill the Inquisitor. When I came to the hall, the Inquisitor had already passed away." Niet Tion's eyes narrowed as he replied. He did not say what happened before the Inquisitor died because he did not want Fengji to decide everything alone. There was still one person from the 3 Fengji. Niet Tion wanted to wait for that person to appear before he could explain everything. "Is that so?" Fengji snorted. His eyes twitched. He suddenly stretched out his hand, and an invisible force swept through the air, grabbing onto Niet Tion's neck. Niet Tion's eyes trembled. He wanted to resist, but he felt that his whole body was sore and weak. He could not exert any strength. Without a doubt, Fengji was a 5th realm celestial lord. "Stop!" At this moment, a low voice was heard. A figure appeared. It was as graceful as an immortal. Niet Tion's gaze shifted, and he saw a young woman appear. Her aura was like a rainbow, and she forced the peak leader to take a step back. Niet Tion immediately felt the pressure disappear. He took a few deep breaths. Spirit seat. Feng's was stabilized his body, his sharp gaze slightly congealed, locking onto the lady from afar. So this lady was the other person from the 3 Fengji, Spirit seat. Fengji, Inquisitor, Fengji, and Spirit seat. Fengji, what happened here? Spirit seat also looked at Fengji and asked. Fengji and Spirit seat did not have a good relationship. Fengji's mouth twitched. Inquisitor passed away. The murderer is this silver-haired kid. What? Spirit seat was shocked. He moved and arrived in front of Inquisitor's corpse. He looked at it for a long time, but did not say anything. Fengji looked at Spirit seat. His mouth twitched as if he was thinking. The black-robed men around him did not say anything. Their faces were filled with fear as if they were worried about something. After a long time, Spirit seat suddenly turned around. His eyes flashed with a strange cold light. He stared at Niet Tion, but did not say anything. Niet Tion felt that Spirit seat's expression was not right. He could not help but be surprised. Could it be that Spirit Seat had something to do with the dead Inquisitor? Spirit Seat, this kid is the murderer of Inquisitor. Don't you want to avenge your master? At this time, Feng Zhi spoke. His tone had a hint of playfulness. Master? When Ye Tian heard this word, his heart sank. So, Inquisitor was Spirit Seat's master. No wonder Spirit Seat's reaction was so unusual. This was bad. Feng Zhi wanted to kill Ye Tian. This Spirit Seat would not let Ye Tian go. Chapter 45-89. Ye Tian never thought that the dead interrogator would be the Spirit Seat's teacher, which caught him off guard. Just now, Feng Sheng had already expressed his killing intent, but was stopped by the Spirit Seat. If the Spirit Seat also thought that Ye Tian was the murderer of the interrogator, then wouldn't Ye Tian be doomed? The Spirit Seat's beautiful eyes were like frost, carefully sizing up Ye Tian, but did not say a word for a long time. The surrounding black-robed men did not dare to speak. Even Feng Sheng was silent. Mysterious Heaven Guard. After a long time, the Spirit Seat finally opened his mouth and bellowed. Here, a black-robed man by the side answered. Lock him up in the heaven-forbidden prison. Without my orders, no one is allowed to see him. The Spirit Seat spoke, intentionally emphasizing the word no one. Yes, the black-robed man obeyed. Spirit Seat, this person killed the interrogator, but you're locking him up in the heaven-forbidden prison. Isn't that inappropriate? Feng Sheng's face darkened and asked cold. Teacher was killed. This Seat is more heartbroken than anyone else, and wants revenge more than anyone else. The Spirit Seat looked at Feng Sheng coldly and said, but there are some things that this Seat needs to investigate clearly. Caught red-handed, this person killed the interrogator. What else do you need to investigate? Feng Sheng's eyes darkened and shouted cold. To him, the Spirit Seat was obviously stalling for time, intentionally protecting Ye Tian. Feng Sheng, do you really think that he has the strength to kill the interrogator? The Spirit Seat suddenly turned. His eyes were like sharp blades, staring at Feng Sheng. Feng Sheng seemed to be frightened by the Spirit Seat and was startled, then said, this brat is an outside martial artist. His body contains an extremely strong power, not much weaker than you and I. If it was the interrogator at his peak, naturally he would not die in his hands. But, speaking till here, Feng Sheng laughed and continued, but the interrogator has been old for a long time. His lifespan is near its end. His immortal spirit is not as strong as before. If he was caught off guard, it would not be strange to be killed by this brat. Is that so? The Spirit Seat's mouth twitched. His gaze was somewhat dazed, and he muttered, so the interrogator is like this in your eyes, isn't it? Feng Zhuxi's gaze turned gloomy and sneered. Although the three sky beacons were called the same, there was a difference between them. The Inquisitor was second only to the Feng Tian Immortal, and his position was higher than the Vanguard Seat and the Spirit Seat. When the three departments discussed matters, the Inquisitor was usually the leader. Moreover, the Spirit Seat was the direct disciple of the Inquisitor. Yunting did not feel that the death of the Inquisitor was a bad thing. He had always coveted the position of Inquisitor, and this was his chance. He had long felt that the Feng Tian sect would not benefit from an old and frail man who always occupied the position of Inquisitor. If I told you that 3 days ago, the Inquisitor reached Realm 6, would you still think that way? Spirit Throne Mu Jin sneered and looked at Yunting with disdain. How could she not know what Yunting was thinking? She just didn't want to expose him. What did you say? Yunting was shocked, thinking that he had misheard. The 6th realm. The Inquisitor had broken through to the 6th realm. How is that possible? There were only a handful of 6th realm immortal venerables in the entire immortal Qi continent. Even the Feng Tian Immortal was only at the 5th realm. Had the Inquisitor really broken through to the 6th realm? You'll know when you see the Inquisitor's body. Mu Jin said coldly, not wanting to talk nonsense. Then, she and the Xintian guard took Ye Tian away. In the hall, Yunting looked at the Inquisitor's body with trembling eyes filled with disbelief. There was an extremely hard-to-detect mark on the forehead of the Inquisitor's body. It was shaped like a crescent moon, and there was a faint surge of immortal power. Immortal mark. Yunting recognized that the crescent moon mark was an immortal mark. It would only appear on the body of a sixth realm immortal venerable. Mu Jin was right. The Inquisitor had reached the sixth realm. Lord Inquisitor, Yunting swears to catch the murderer and avenge you. After a long time, Yunting bowed deeply to the Inquisitor's body. His eyes burned with anger and determination. The Fengtian sect had finally produced a grand immortal venerable, but he died just like that. How could he not be angry? At this point, Yunting no longer thought that Nie Tian was the murderer of the Inquisitor. Since the Inquisitor had reached the sixth realm, how could Nie Tian have a chance to kill him? In this world, only a grand immortal venerable could kill a grand immortal venerable. There was a high possibility that a grand immortal venerable was hiding in the Fengtian sect. Fengtian sect, celestial prison. Nie Tian sat in his cell, his mind unsettled. When he was taken out of the hall, he didn't see Qin Chi, Mo Rushi, or even Qin Qinglan. After entering the hall, everything happened too suddenly. Nie Tian was unprepared and panicked. But now that he thought about it, it seemed that Qin Qinglan was very suspicious. At that time, Qin Qinglan came out of the hall and seemed very nervous. Moreover, for the time Qin Qinglan walked out of the hall to the time Nie Tian entered the hall, only a very short time had passed. The Inquisitor had already stepped into the sixth stage of the great immortal venerable realm. Who could kill him in such a short period of time? Perhaps someone in the immortal Qi continent could easily kill a grand immortal venerable who had just stepped into the sixth realm, but it was almost impossible to do so without making a sound. Before Nie Tian entered the hall, he didn't hear any sound. This was the strange part. Before Master Qin entered the hall, the Inquisitor had been seriously injured and was on the verge of death. After a while, Nie Tian had a guess in his heart. The reason why Master Qin lied was most likely because she was threatened. The person who killed the Inquisitor was lurking around Master Qin and secretly controlling her every move. Upon coming to this conclusion, Nie Tian's heart sank and his expression flickered. If his guess was right, then Qin Qinglan, Mo Rushi, and Qin Chi couldn't have been kidnapped by the murderer, right? Oh no! Nie Tian's heart trembled inexplicably, and he shouted, "Help, help!" But after shouting for a long time, no one responded. Damn it! Nie Tian let out a bellow as he made up his mind to break out of the heaven-forbidden prison. But just as he was about to circulate his yuan meridians, he felt an invisible force appear and instantly fill his body. It was like a seal, imprisoning his yuan meridians. Nie Tian frowned and was unwilling to give up. He forcefully circulated his yuan meridians and tried to break through the seal, but a surge of qi and blood caused him to spurt out a mouthful of blood. How could this be? Nie Tian turned pale with fright. This heaven-forbidden prison was much stronger than he expected. Don't waste your energy. You won't be able to get out of the heaven-forbidden prison. At this moment, a cold but familiar voice suddenly sounded, causing Nie Tian's expression to change. It's you. Nie Tian suddenly turned around and saw a familiar face. It was Mu Jin from the Sky Beacon Spirit Seat. He never thought that Mu Jin would be in the prison as well. You've been lurking around me? Nie Tian was shocked and asked loudly. He actually didn't sense Mu Jin's aura at all. If the latter didn't take the initiative to appear, he still wouldn't have noticed. Chapter 4590. In the Celestial Prison, Nie Tian was surprised to see Mu Jin suddenly appear. He never expected that Mu Jin had been lurking around him without him noticing. You really are not the murderer of Master. Mu Jin, the spirit seat of the Heaven Beacons, looked at Nie Tian with deep worry on her delicate face. Aren't you sure that I don't have the ability to kill the Inquisitor? Nie Tian asked coldly, his eyes darkening. It was just a guess. Now I'm sure. Mu Jin regained her composure and said indifferently, Now that you are sure that I am not the murderer, please let me out immediately. Nie Tian was worried about the safety of Mo Rushi and the others. What are you worried about? Mu Jin could see Nie Tian's nervousness and asked with a frown. My friend. Nie Tian didn't want to waste time, so he directly told her about Mo Rushi and the others. Finally, he said, Since I am not the murderer, then the one who killed the Inquisitor must be someone else. I think that person is now lurking in the Fontian sect and is very likely to have taken my friend. You said that you were ambushed in Foaming Mountain? Mujin, on the other hand, was neither anxious nor slow as she calmly asked. Yes, although Ngan was anxious. He had no choice but to say, those men in black killed several people around Master Qin, and Master Qin was almost killed by them. I didn't see anyone outside the hall. Mujin thought for a moment and said, but don't worry. I will send someone to find Qin Xinglan and ask her face to face. After that, she moved and disappeared out of thin air. Nie Tian was stunned. He wanted to go out with Mujin, but it was too late. The celestial prison was a cage for Nie Tian, but it didn't stop Mujin. If I'm not wrong, this celestial prison has this woman's bloodline restriction. At this time, the fat cat, who hadn't appeared for a long time, suddenly said, bloodline restriction? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment before he reacted. Doesn't that mean that only she can open the heaven-forbidden prison? Yes. The fat cat nodded and said, don't be too anxious now. Even if the murderer takes Mo Rushi and the others away, he may not hurt them. Why? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, unable to react for a moment. Since that person could kill a 6th-stage immortal venerable, he must be very strong. If he wanted to harm Mo Rushi and the others, he could have just killed them outside the hall. Why would he need to abduct them? Fat Cat replied. Nie Tian nodded in understanding. Since there were no corpses of Mo Rushi and the others outside the hall, it meant that the man had only abducted them and had no intention of harming them. Following that, Nie Tian had no choice but to obediently wait in the heaven-forbidden prison. About an hour later, Mujin finally returned. However, her face was dark and gloomy. Spirit Seat, have you found Qin Xinglan? Nie Tian's heart sank when he saw that Mujin's expression was not right. Mujin shook her head and said solemnly, I sent people to search the Fontian sect, but they couldn't find Qin Xinglan. She seems to have disappeared completely. Damn it! Nie Tian roared and punched the stone wall beside him. They must have been taken away by that person. Huh? Mujin's eyes trembled at this moment, and she looked at Nie Tian with a surprised expression. She noticed that when Nie Tian punched just now, there was a strange fluctuation of immortal force. Logically speaking, Nie Tian was not an immortal cultivator, and there was no immortal force in his body, so how could there be a fluctuation of immortal force? Have you cultivated the immortal Tao? Mujin frowned and couldn't help asking. No. Nie Tian was a little upset and shook his head. Give me your hand. Mujin's expression changed slightly, and she said hurriedly. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, but he still stretched out his hand. Mujin's eyes narrowed slightly, and a strange light was released from her eyes, falling precisely on Nie Tian's hand. And then a strange scene happened. When the strange light fell, it actually stirred up a strange vortex on Nie Tian's palm. Huh? Nie Tian was shocked by the scene in front of him, and his expression changed. The vortex seemed to be a little familiar. Right. It was very similar to the vortex above the heads of the immortal cultivators he saw on the immortal ground. It was a bit like the immortal palace of the immortal cultivators. But how is this possible? Nie Tian was not an immortal cultivator, so how could his palm release the same power as the immortal palace? What's going on? Nie Tian was at a loss, and he had no idea what was going on in front of him. Why is this aura so familiar? Mujin didn't seem to hear Nie Tian's words, and her beautiful eyes flickered as if she was thinking about something. Master. Suddenly, Mujin's pretty face changed, and she said in surprise, This is the aura of Master's immortal power. Lord Interrogator? Nie Tian was stunned at first, and then his expression changed as well. He remembered the scene before the interrogator died. Before the interrogator died, he put a thumb ring on Nie Tian's finger. But the strange thing was that the thumb ring then disappeared. Nie Tian was so anxious that he forgot about it. Is this the thumb ring? After listening to Nie Tian, Mujin stretched out her thumb and showed him a white jade thumb ring. Yes, it's exactly the same jade thumb ring as this one. Seeing the jade ring on Mujin's hand, Tian couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. He then said, "But the jade ring suddenly disappeared after I put it on my finger. I don't know how to get it back." Tian didn't expect Mu Jin to have an identical jade thumb ring. Was it something like a keepsake between master and disciple? The Ring of Judgment. Mu Jin was stunned for a moment, and only said these words after a long time. The Ring of Judgment? Tian saw Mu Jin's big reaction, and he couldn't help but be stunned. What was this Ring of Judgment? It seemed to have a great origin. The 3 peaks of Tian each have an immortal ring, which is a symbol of identity and position. Mu Jin calmed down and said, "The interrogators is the Ring of Judgment, the vanguards is the Ring of Sharp Flame, and the Spirit Masters is the Ring of Spiritual Deity. 3 immortal rings have always been worn by the 3 peaks, and they have been passed down from generation to generation. Every 3 peaks of the Tian sect will inject their own immortal power into the immortal ring, and after years of accumulation, who knows how much immortal power there is in the immortal ring." Saying this, her eyes trembled, and she looked at Tian and said, "I never thought that master would pass the Ring of Judgment to you. Pass it to me?" Tian frowned and suddenly thought of something. He said in surprise, "What do you mean?" The 3 immortal rings were passed down from generation to generation, and they were the 3 symbols of status. Before the interrogator died, he gave the Ring of Judgment to Tian, and it was obvious that he wanted to pass it down. "Master has chosen you to be the next Tian Inquisitor." Mu Jin's eyes were deep, but the huge waves in her heart could still be seen. She never dreamed that her master would choose an outsider to be the Tian Inquisitor. Chapter 4591. What did you say? Tian's expression changed when he heard Mu Jin's words. He was very surprised. The Inquisitor chose him to be the next guy Inquisitor. Was this a joke? The Ring of Judgment is the symbol of the Inquisitor. It is also an item passed down from generation to generation. Mu Jin calmed down and said, "Before Teacher died, he gave the Ring of Judgment to you. He chose you to be the next Inquisitor." "That's impossible." Tian frowned and said, "Maybe I appeared before the Inquisitor died, and he only gave me the Ring of Judgment for safekeeping." Mu Jin shook her head and said, "The Ring of Judgment has the Inquisitor's bloodline imprint. Only by removing the imprint can the Ring of Judgment be taken off. Before Teacher died, he voluntarily removed the imprint and gave the Ring of Judgment to you. This means that you are his inheritor." This? Tian was taken aback and didn't know what to say. Also, the Ring of Judgment is spiritual, and not just anyone can wear it. Mu Jin nodded and said, "Since you can wear the Ring of Judgment, it means that you have been recognized by the ring. But I don't even know how to use the Ring of Judgment." Tian was at a loss. He couldn't even sense the existence of the Ring of Judgment, nor did he know how to make the Ring of Judgment appear. You just received the Ring of Judgment and need to establish a new bloodline imprint. Mu Jin's eyes darkened and said, "It usually takes 3 to 5 days to establish a bloodline imprint. Once the imprint is established, you will be able to control the Ring of Judgment freely." "So that's how it is." Tian nodded in understanding, but his expression didn't look good. The Ring of Judgment made him become the Sky Beacon Inquisitor for no reason. In this way, he became a member of the Tian sect and held a high position. But he didn't know anything about the Tian sect and didn't want to stay here for long. What was more troublesome was how many people recognized him as the Sky Inquisitor. Not to mention others, even Mu Jin didn't have a clear attitude. "Tian, can you tell me what happened when you saw Master?" A moment later, Mu Jin had completely calmed down. She looked at Tian with a strange gaze and asked in a deep voice. Tian nodded and recounted everything that had happened in the hall in full detail. "You're saying that in the beginning, you thought Master was dead, but then Master suddenly came back to life and put the Ring of Judgment on your finger?" After hearing Tian's words, Mu Jin frowned and muttered to herself, "Yes." Tian didn't know what Mu Jin was thinking, so he nodded. "My guess is that the person who killed Master also thought that he had already killed Master." Mu Jin's gaze slightly froze as she said, but he didn't expect that Master actually left him with his last breath. "After that, you appeared and Master chose you as the next Inquisitor. That should be the case. Yet Tian still didn't hear the main point of Mu Jin's words and just nodded. I think that before Master died, he must have left important information about the murderer in the Ring of Judgment. Mu Jin's eyes lit up at this moment, and there was a blazing look in her eyes. That's possible. And yet Tian's eyes also lit up, and he was extremely surprised. The Inquisitor was not directly killed by the murderer, but left him with his last breath and left a message in the Ring of Judgment. It was very reasonable. Unfortunately, you haven't established a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment, so you can't see the information in the Ring of Judgment for the time being. Mu Jin shook her head and smiled bitterly, feeling somewhat helpless. Spirit Seed, is there any way for me to establish a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment quickly? Yet Tian couldn't wait any longer and asked anxiously. If he could see the information in the Ring of Judgment, he might be able to find the murderer. Mo Rushi and the others were very likely to be taken away by the murderer, and yet Tian certainly didn't want to wait a moment longer. No. Mu Jin shook her head and said, the bloodline imprint is the internal connection between the Ring of Judgment and the holder, and external forces can't interfere with it. If your bloodline is strong enough, the time needed to establish the bloodline imprint will be shorter, and vice versa. Then what should we do? Are we going to wait for a few days? And yet Tian was a little anxious, and his expression was very ugly. He was now worried that if the murderer left Fengming Mountain and took Mo Rushi and the others away, then it would be terrible. The Immortal Qi continent was so big, and it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens for him to find the murderer. There's no other way but to wait. Mu Jin was also very helpless, and she shook her head and sighed. Then, can you let me out now? Tian had no choice but to go out and search. Mu Jin looked at Tian, obviously thinking. After hesitating for a long time, she finally shook her head and said, I'm sorry, you can't go out yet. The matter of the Ring of Judgment can't be made public for now. Although Master has chosen you to be the next Inquisitor, you are still an outsider, and you have just arrived at the Fengtian sect. If the news that you are the next Inquisitor spreads, I'm afraid it will cause unnecessary trouble. I know you won't recognize me, and I don't want to be an Inquisitor. Yet Tian was already mentally prepared for Mu Jin's reaction. His eyes darkened, and he said, when the bloodline imprint is established, I will immediately remove it and return the Ring of Judgment to you. It's not as simple as you think. After the new bloodline imprint is established, it can only be removed after at least 10 years. Mu Jin frowned and said, if you want to remove it in advance, you'll have to die. Yet Tian frowned. He didn't expect things to be so troublesome. He thought for a moment and said, then I will temporarily help you keep the Ring of Judgment, and when the bloodline imprint can be removed, I will return it to you. In the meantime, you can find a new Inquisitor. An Inquisitor without the Ring of Judgment. The Fengtian sect will not recognize him. Mu Jin shook her head again and said solemnly, then what should we do? Yet Tian frowned and said, you don't want to recognize me, and you don't want an Inquisitor without the Ring of Judgment. Isn't this a dilemma? There is a solution, but I don't want to use it until the last moment. Mu Jin frowned, and her voice suddenly turned cold. What solution? Yet Tian felt the coldness from Mu Jin and couldn't help but ask. Kill you. Mu Jin looked at Tian, paused, and said cold. Tian felt the fleeting murderous intent from her, and suddenly felt a chill run through his body. Indeed, after killing him and then finding a suitable new owner for the Ring of Judgment, everything would be solved. But Mu Jin didn't seem to want to do this, at least not now. Don't worry, I won't kill you now. Mu Jin let out a long breath and said, I don't know why Master chose you, but since he did this, he must have his reasons. I hope that you can prove that Master's choice is right. You won't kill me, and you won't reveal my identity. Are you going to imprison me forever? Yet Tian's eyes darkened, and he asked cold. Chapter 4592. Tian was worried about the safety of Mo Rushi and the others, but Mu Jin insisted on keeping him in the heaven-forbidden prison. How could he not be angry? However, Mu Jin was very calm. She said indifferently, you are the safest here. Even if you get out, you won't be able to do anything. So I advise you to establish a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment. You are worried that the news of me possessing the Ring of Judgment will be leaked, but only you and I know about this. If we don't say anything, how will others know? Tian was still a little agitated and asked in a cold tone. You don't cultivate the path of immortals, so you don't have any immortal force in your body. When the Ring of Judgment establishes a bloodline imprint with you, the immortal force in it will dissipate to a certain extent. Any slightly stronger immortal would be able to notice it with a single glance. Mu Jin's beautiful brows knit together, and she seemed to have lost her patience as she replied coldly. Tian was rendered speechless for a moment. He also knew that the Fengtian sect would not accept an inquisitor from the outside world. Once the news of the Ring of Judgment was exposed, a large number of people in the Fengtian sect would want his life. Just as Mu Jin said, it was safer for Tian to stay in the heaven-forbidden prison. If you don't want to die, then listen to me. I will let you safely sit in the position of inquisitor. Mu Jin said in a cold tone, clearly very impatient. Did I say I want to be an inquisitor? Tian frowned and asked cold. If this inquisitor was going to be imprisoned in the heaven-forbidden prison, then it was better not to. Between death and becoming an inquisitor, do you have a choice? Mu Jin sneered and disappeared. Tian frowned, and his expression was very ugly. Before coming to the Fengtian sect, he was already prepared and knew that this visit would be very difficult. But he never thought that he would encounter an inquisitor being killed. It seemed that he had no other choice but to obediently stay in the heaven-forbidden prison. This woman is not one to be trifled with. I advise you to listen to her arrangements for the time being. At this moment, the fat cat appeared and said with a laugh. Tian didn't know why Fat Cat was still so young, so he said with a gloomy expression, but I don't know if Ru Shi and the others are still alive. Do I have no choice but to wait in this cell? In my opinion, that woman is right. Even if you go out now, you won't be able to do anything. The fat cat stopped smiling, thought for a moment, and said, You know nothing about the Fengtian sect, and that woman hasn't even found the murderer. What do you do out there? Moreover, your current identity is special. If someone were to find out that you have the Ring of Judgment, I'm afraid that even if this woman wants to protect you, she won't be able to. Can't you see that if the dead Inquisitor wasn't this woman's master, and you're the successor chosen by her master, I'm afraid that this woman would kill you first. Tian frowned and became silent. Indeed, Mu Jin actually wanted to kill Tian. Perhaps it was because she followed her master's will that she chose to help Tian. If it wasn't for Mu Jin, Tian would have died in the hands of Yunteng, the Edge leader. I think that you should focus on establishing a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment. That is more important than anything else. The fat cat said and suddenly paused, as if she was hesitating, but she still said, I have a feeling that the Ring of Judgment isn't as simple as an inheritance token. Behind the Ring of Judgment, there might be other secrets. I'm even guessing that the murderer might have killed the Inquisitor because of the Ring of Judgment. That's possible. Hearing what the fat cat said, Tian couldn't help but be surprised. If that was the case, then Tian didn't need to find the murderer. He could just wait for the murderer to find him. If the murderer was after the Ring of Judgment, then he wouldn't have left before he got it. Tian thought and said, since he killed the Inquisitor but didn't get the Ring of Judgment, shouldn't he have taken the Inquisitor's body away? Maybe he wanted to take it away, but didn't know how to take out the Ring of Judgment, so he was delayed. Then Qin Xinglan suddenly came, so he secretly controlled Qin Xinglan. The fat cat thought and said, That can't be right. Tian frowned even more. While thinking, he asked the question in his heart, since that person controlled Qin Xinglan, then he definitely wouldn't have left the hall before he got the Ring of Judgment. Maybe when the Inquisitor gave me the Ring of Judgment, the murderer was also there. But why didn't he attack me? Maybe he didn't have time, or maybe he was afraid. The fat cat nodded slightly. Afraid? Tian's eyes darkened, and he said, since the murderer could easily kill the Inquisitor of the Sixth Realm, why would he be afraid of others? Easily killed? The fat cat raised his eyebrows and smiled. Who told you that it was easy for that person to kill the Inquisitor? I guess that person was also seriously injured by the Inquisitor. Otherwise, why would he secretly control Qin Xinlan? And yet Tian pondered for a moment, and then fell silent. The fat cat's words made some sense. With the strength of the murderer, he shouldn't use this kind of method to secretly control people. But there must be a reason why he did it. Maybe, as Fat Cat said, the murderer also paid the price for killing the Inquisitor. So, when he saw the Spirit and the Edge leader, he didn't dare to show up, but took Mo Rushi and the others away. And yet, Tian, now that the Ring of Judgment is in your hands, the murderer definitely won't dare to do anything to Mo Rushi and the others. The fat cat smiled and said, "So, the most important thing for you now is to establish a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment and figure out what secrets the Ring of Judgment is hiding. In this way, when a murderer appears, you will have a trump card to negotiate with." Yes. Tian nodded heavily and decided to calm down and focus on the matter of the bloodline imprint. Next, Tian didn't waste any more time. He focused on sensing the aura of the Ring of Judgment and tried to establish a bloodline imprint in advance. But unfortunately, no matter how hard he tried, he still couldn't sense the existence of the Ring of Judgment. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. Why still not? Tian still hadn't established a bloodline imprint, and he couldn't even sense the existence of the Ring of Judgment. He couldn't help but feel anxious and paced back and forth in the heaven-forbidden prison. Moreover, in these 3 days, Mu Jin seemed to have disappeared and didn't appear. According to Mu Jin, the establishment of a bloodline imprint was related to the strength of the bloodline of the holder of the Ring of Judgment. The stronger the bloodline, the shorter the time to establish the bloodline imprint, and vice versa. Tian was very confident in his bloodline, but after 3 days, there was no progress at all. How could he not be anxious? Could it be because I'm not an immortal cultivator, so the Ring of Judgment doesn't recognize my bloodline at all? Tian was anxious and began to let his imagination run wild. Cough, cough. At this moment, 2 dry coughs suddenly came from the void, startling Tian. He turned around and saw a man in black standing behind him. Chapter 4593. Celestial Prison. All of a sudden, Tian heard a dry cough. He turned around and was shocked to find that a black-robed man had been standing behind him since he didn't know when. The man in black was tall, almost as tall as Judge Yunting, but he looked a bit stooped, as if he was very old. The man in black's face was hidden under the black robe, but Tian could clearly feel a surge of celestial force from the man in black. It should be a dark type of celestial force. This was the first time he came into contact with dark celestial force, so he couldn't help but feel nervous. "Little guy, I've been watching you for 3 days. You're really patient." The man in black spoke. He seemed to be laughing, but there was a hint of playfulness in his tone. "Who are you?" Tian forced himself to calm down and asked in a deep voice. What he wanted to ask was, "Why are you here?" Wasn't Mu Jin's bloodline restriction spell in the celestial prison? Why was this person in the prison? Tian could understand that Mu Jin could come and go as she pleased. But how did this person come to the celestial prison? "Don't be nervous. I mean you no harm." The man in black smiled again and said, "If I really wanted to kill you, do you think you would still be alive now? Then who are you?" Tian took a deep breath and calmed down a lot before he asked again. "I'm the person you've been waiting for." As the man in black spoke, he took a few steps back and leaned against the wall. His body swayed a little as if he had suffered a serious injury. "You're the killer of a judge?" Tian's eyes flickered violently as he exclaimed, "Hee." Suddenly, the black-clothed man inexplicably laughed and said, "Where's the little fat cat beside you?" "I'm here." The little fat cat answered and appeared on Tian's shoulder. It stared at the black-robed man with its sharp eyes and said, "I didn't expect you to be hiding in the heaven-forbidden prison all this time. But looking at your current appearance, I should have guessed correctly. You are indeed heavily injured." The man in black had been lurking in the celestial prison, but the fat cat hadn't noticed him at all. This made him a little angry. "You're right about me being injured." The man in black was not nervous at all. He seemed to be still smiling as he said, "Moreover, I did come for the Ring of Judgment." But most importantly, you've all guessed wrong. What's the important point? Yet Tian and Fat Cat were shocked at the same time and asked in unison, "Kill the Inquisitor." The black-clothed man's voice trembled slightly as he uttered these three words. Yet Tian couldn't help but frown. He immediately reacted and asked, "You mean you didn't kill the Grand Inquisitor? If I told you that the old man died of chi deviation, would you believe me?" The man in black snickered in disdain. That old man's lifespan was at its end, but he still forcefully used a forbidden technique to break through to the 6th level. Unfortunately, he was completely unable to control the backlash of the forbidden art, and in the end, he died from chi deviation. Nie Tian was stunned and couldn't react for a long time. The man in black's explanation was far beyond his expectations, and he couldn't accept it at all. "I admit, Mu Qianlan, am not a good person, but I can't betray my master." The man in black's voice turned cold. "I was looking for the old man because I wanted to know a secret about the Ring of Judgment, but he wouldn't tell me, so I left." But who would have thought that at that moment the backlash from the forbidden technique exploded and he died of chi deviation? "What did you say?" Nie Tian was shocked again and asked in a low voice, "You are the Inquisitor's disciple? Betray his master." Didn't this mean that this man in black who called himself Mu Qianlan was the Inquisitor's disciple? Nie Tian was once again flabbergasted by this sudden change. "Aren't you curious why I can enter and leave the heaven-forbidden prison freely?" Mu Qianlan smiled and asked calmly. "Why?" Nie Tian's gaze sharpened as he asked in a hurry. This was indeed a question he had, but he never asked it. The heaven-forbidden prison has Mu Jin's bloodline restriction. Apart from Mu Jin, the only people who can enter and leave the prison freely are those who have the same bloodline as her. Mu Qianlan smiled and said in a deep voice, "You have the same bloodline as the spirit seat." Nie Tian immediately reacted and asked after a moment of hesitation, "Who are you to the spirit seat?" "I am her twin brother." Mu Qianlan smiled again and slowly lifted the black robe, revealing a horrifying face. The face was extremely emaciated, as if there was no flesh or blood at all. It was just a piece of skin covering the bones of the face. However, the skin of the face was covered with black runes, which were somewhat similar to Nie Tian's divine demon inverse marks. However, this face did look similar to Mu Jin's. In addition, he could enter and leave the heaven-forbidden prison freely, which proved that he was related to the spirit seat, Mu Jin. However, whether the Inquisitor's words were true or not remained to be confirmed. "You have been lurking around me for the Ring of Judgment, right?" Nie Tian could tell that Mu Qianlan was severely injured and asked. "Yes." Mu Qianlan did not hide it and said, "I can make a deal with you. Once you establish a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment, you can tell me a secret in the Ring of Judgment. I'll return your friend to you. What do you think?" Ru Shi and the others were indeed captured by you. Nie Tian's eyes darkened, and he said cold, "How do I know that my friends are safe now?" He hated being threatened, and he hated it even more when the other party used his friend as a bargaining chip. "It seems that you care a lot about your friends." Mu Qianlan smiled and said, "I can assure you that your friends are safe. If it wasn't for me, they would have been killed." Nie Tian frowned, and his face turned cold when he heard Mu Qianlan's words. "Ahem, don't be nervous." Mu Qianlan coughed as if he was severely injured and said, "I don't know who those assassins were. They hid very well, and I was injured. I didn't want to get involved with them, so I scared them away." "How can I believe you?" Nie Tian asked cold with a gloomy face, like a beast that was suppressing its anger. "I'm sorry, but you have no choice but to believe me." Mu Qianlan was not afraid at all. It seemed that he was also a shrewd person. He said, "I, Mu Qianlan." As he said that, he suddenly felt something. His face changed slightly, and then he laughed. "What are you laughing at?" Nie Tian didn't know what was going on in the face of this sudden strange action. "She's here." The corner of Mu Qianlan's mouth twitched, and his smile was a little evil. "She?" Nie Tian was stunned at first, but then he reacted and said a name, Spirit Seat. Chapter 4594. Spirit Seat Mu Jin. Nie Tian's eyes flashed with a strange light when he heard that Mu Jin was here. As soon as Mu Jin arrived, everything that Mu Qianlong said could be confirmed. Aren't you afraid? However, Mu Qianlong didn't have much of a reaction. He didn't look nervous at all. Instead, he looked strangely proud. This made Nye Tian feel strange, and he couldn't help but ask, "Why should I be afraid?" Mu Qianlong laughed and said in a sinister tone, "Nye Tian, don't tell me you really believe Mu Jin. Do you really think she didn't notice anything about the old man's death?" This. Nye Tian was shocked again and couldn't say anything for a while. Could it be that Mu Jin already knew that the Inquisitor wasn't killed, but died from chi deviation? If that was the case, then Nye Tian was still too young to trust Mu Jin so easily. But luckily, Mu Jin didn't do anything else. When the siblings meet, everything will be clear. As expected, after a while, Mu Jin's figure appeared in the heaven-forbidden prison like a ghost. "Little sister, long time no see." Mu Qianlong looked at the very familiar person in front of her, but there was a cold smile at the corner of her mouth, as if the other party was not her own sister, but her own enemy. "Mu Qianlong, it's really you." When Mu Jin saw her twin brother, a cold glint flashed in her beautiful eyes as she coldly snorted. Her words revealed that she already knew who the murderer was, but she didn't mention it to Nye Tian. "Since you already knew it was me, then you should have waited for me in the heaven-forbidden prison." Mu Qianlong chuckled as if he was laughing at Mu Jin's stupidity. "Why did you kill Master?" Mu Jin suppressed her anger and asked in a cold tone. "Little sister, you are still deceiving yourself at this time." Mu Qianlong frowned and shook his head with an embarrassed smile. "Can't you tell how the old man died? Or are you overestimating your brother and thinking that I can kill a sixth-stage immortal venerable?" Mu Jin's pupils suddenly constricted, and she seemed to have been struck by lightning. She was stunned on the spot and didn't react for a long time. Obviously, she already had a guess in her heart, but she didn't have the courage to admit it. Mu Qianlong's words confirmed her guess, and she couldn't accept it for a while. That old man's lifespan had clearly reached its end, but he still didn't want to die. In the end, he couldn't help but use a forbidden technique to forcefully break through to the 6th level. Seeing Mu Jin's reaction, Mu Qianlong couldn't help but laugh. Unfortunately, forbidden techniques aren't that easy to use. The old man couldn't suppress the backlash of the forbidden technique and died from chi deviation. But I didn't expect him to have such a deep hatred for me. Before he died, he even wanted to drag me down with him. If I hadn't been prepared, I'm afraid you would have lost 2 of your closest relatives. Shut up. Mu Jin suddenly raised her head and growled. Her eyes were incomparably fierce, like a man-eating beast. But Mu Qianlong wasn't afraid at all. He provoked, "What? Do you want to kill your only relative in this world with your own hands?" Mu Qianlong, Master has been good to you. He raised you, taught you immortal arts, and even appointed you as the next Inquisitor to be his successor. Why are you still not satisfied? Mu Jin seemed to have gone mad as she growled in a low voice. Is that so? Mu Qianlong laughed, as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. He said, "So, in your heart, the old man is so revered. It's no wonder the old man really does see you as his own. In your heart, he's like a teacher and a father. But in my heart, he's just a hypocrite through and through." Mu Qianlong. Mu Jin was completely enraged and roared. "You're biting the hand that feeds you. Don't tell me you want to completely destroy your image as an elder brother in my heart?" Mu Qianlong's pupils suddenly shrank. His face froze for a moment. Then he fell into silence and didn't speak for a long time. So, in Mu Jin's heart, he still had the image of an elder brother. In the celestial prison, there was a deathly silence that made it hard for one to breathe. At this moment, as a bystander, Nye Tian couldn't tell who was right and who was wrong. He could see that Mu Jin respected the Inquisitor very much. But in Mu Qianlong's words, the Inquisitor had a completely different image. No one could tell what the truth was. "Why aren't you talking?" After a long time, Mu Jin calmed down and broke the silence again. "Just kill me." Mu Qianlong suddenly became calm. Looking at Mu Jin, there was a faint affection in his eyes. He said, "Everything is my fault. My hometown, the Inquisitor, is dead. I shouldn't be alive anymore." "Do it." Then, Mu Qianlong closed his eyes and looked like he was waiting to be killed, as if there was a sense of righteousness in it. You didn't kill Master. I won't kill you, Mu Jin said coldly after a moment of silence. He's already dead. What does it matter whether I killed him or not? Mu Qianlong smiled and said, there must be a murderer for his death. I can't tell others that he died because he cultivated a forbidden technique, right? You. Mu Jin's beautiful eyes trembled. She wanted to get angry, but she suppressed it. Little sister, I've killed many people and done many evil things in my life. Mu Qianlong became even more calm and indifferent. He smiled. To die in your hands is the best ending for me. Mu Jin's eyes were fixed on Mu Qianlong, and beads of sweat oozed from her palms. Finally, she took a step forward. It seems that I, as your brother, can't compare to that hypocritical old man. Mu Qianlong felt the oppressive, murderous intent coming toward him. He twitched his lips and smiled helplessly in his heart. But none of that mattered anymore. Since that old man had always maintained the image of a good teacher and a kind father, then it wouldn't be a bad thing for his little sister to remember him like that, right? Unfortunately, he would no longer be able to hear his little sister call him Big Brother. Mu Jin's steps were extremely heavy, but she finally reached Mu Qianlong's side. She looked at her brother who had already closed his eyes. She finally made up her mind and raised her hand. At this moment, as long as her palm landed, Mu Qianlong would definitely die. My dear little sister, thank you for freeing me. Mu Qianlong murmured in his heart, waiting for the final moment to come. 2 lines of tears appeared in Mu Jin's eyes. She closed her eyes, and the hand finally moved. The pressure from the celestial spiritual energy caused the entire prison to tremble. Wait! At this crucial moment, a voice was suddenly heard. Bang! Nie Tian's figure suddenly moved. Sword aura surged around him. He used his body to block the fatal palm for Mu Qianlong. Chapter 4595. Inside the celestial prison, just before Mu Jin's palm fell, Nie Tian's figure suddenly appeared and blocked the fatal blow for Mu Qianlong. Bang! With a muffled sound, the impact of a mortal force and sword chi hit the surrounding walls, leaving dazzling sword marks. Nie Tian's figure retreated a few steps and then spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was as pale as paper. Mu Jin was the Fengtian spirit seat, and her cultivation had reached the earth rank immortal venerable. How could Nie Tian resist her full force palm? Fortunately, Nie Tian's martial body was strong. Although he was injured, it was not fatal. Nie Tian, what are you doing? Mu Jin suddenly opened her eyes and looked at Nie Tian, cold, and growled. She never thought that Nie Tian would stand up to protect Mu Qianlong. Spirit seat, since Mu Qianlong didn't kill the Inquisitor, it's a bit inappropriate for you to kill him. Nie Tian was very calm and said indifferently. In fact, he didn't want to make a move, but Mu Qianlong had captured Mo Rushi and the others and hadn't told him their whereabouts. Moreover, he had a feeling that Mu Qianlong's words were more credible than the Inquisitor's. Mu Jin frowned, and her pretty face was a bit gloomy, but her mood was a lot calmer. She looked at Mu Qianlong and said after a moment of silence, Mu Qianlong, I won't kill you today, but from today onwards, we have nothing to do with each other. I want you to leave the Fengtian sect now and never come back. Mu Qianlong was also much calmer. He looked at Mu Jin with a strange light flashing in his eyes and said, I'm sorry, I can't leave the Fengtian sect now. What else do you want? Mu Jin's beautiful eyes were filled with anger and cold. Not killing Mu Qianlong was already the biggest concession she could make. If he were to push his luck, he would be forcing her to make a move. I came to the Fengtian sect for the Ring of Judgment. Mu Qianlong did not shy away and directly stated his purpose for coming to the Fengtian sect. Mu Qianlong, you were expelled from the sect for cultivating a forbidden technique back then. Now, you've suddenly returned for the Ring of Judgment. Mu Jin sneered. Do you think you can inherit the position of an Inquisitor? I've never wanted to be an Inquisitor. Moreover, the forbidden technique I practiced back then wasn't as simple as you think. However, Mu Qianlong was extremely calm as he said indifferently, I just want to know a secret within the Ring of Judgment. As long as I figure out the secret, I will naturally leave. What if I insist that you leave now? Mu Jin's pretty face was cold. The silent, murderous intent surged again. Mu Qianlong was not afraid at all. Instead, he smiled and glanced at Nie Tian. This new Inquisitor's friend is still in my hands. Moreover, I feel that the Fengtian sect needs me now. Mu Jin's eyes darkened as she glanced at Nie Tian cold. Only now did she understand why the latter risked his life to save the Inquisitor. However, her face was still cold as she said, "The Fengtian sect does not need a traitor. Is that so?" Mu Qianlong smiled again and looked at Mu Jin strangely. "If I'm not wrong, the Fengtian sect is in big trouble now. It has nothing to do with you." Mu Jin's eyes trembled as she replied cold. Indeed, the Fengtian sect was currently in great danger. Mu Jin was originally busy dealing with the death of the Inquisitor, but in the past few days, people kept reporting bad news to her. Many immortals of the Fengtian sect were ambushed on Fengming Mountain. There were even several ambushes that caused the Fengtian sect to suffer heavy losses. Previously, Mu Jin already knew that Qin Qinglan and the others were ambushed, but she thought it was just an accident. In addition, the death of the Inquisitor was a great blow to her, so she did not take it seriously. It was not until more and more people were ambushed that she realized the seriousness of the matter. And today, there was an ambush in the Fengtian sect. Mu Jin personally led some people to the ambush site to check, but there was no trace of the ambush except for the corpses on the ground. It was no exaggeration to say that the Fengtian sect was now in a state of panic, almost in danger of collapsing. The Fengtian sect had stood on the Xinchi continent for countless years and had always been the dragon of cultivation in the Xinchi continent. Since the founding of the Fengtian sect, such a terrible thing had never happened. Who on earth had extended their claws to the Fengtian sect? Mu Jin and Yunting were already thinking that it was time to ask the Fengtian immortal to come out of seclusion. "I've seen those men in black, but I just ignored them." Mu Qianlong smiled. Of course, he could see that Mu Jin's toughness was fake. He said, "If you let me stay and figure out the secret of the Ring of Judgment, I can help you find those people. Are you making a deal with me?" Mu Jin's beautiful eyes darkened slightly, and she asked coldly, "Sort of." Mu Qianlong was still smiling. "What do you want from the Ring of Judgment?" Mu Jin put away her killing intent. Obviously, she was a little tempted, but she was worried that Mu Qianlong had ulterior motives for the Fengtian sect. "Don't worry, even if the Fengtian sect kicks me out, I won't do anything to let the Fengtian sect down." Mu Qianlong heard Mu Jin's worry, and he said lightly, "The secret I want to know is only related to the forbidden technique that I'm practicing, and it won't threaten the Fengtian sect." Mu Jin stared at Mu Qianlong deeply, and after a long time she said, "Then how can I believe that you have the ability to find the men in black? Bring me a corpse that was killed by the men in black, and I will prove my ability to you." Mu Qianlong nodded and said, "Okay." Mu Jin hesitated for a moment, but she still nodded, and then her figure moved and disappeared directly. "Thank you for just now." After Mu Jin left, Mu Qianlong looked at Nie Tian and nodded to thank him. No matter what purpose Nie Tian had, he had saved his life after all, and deserved to be thanked. "I don't need your thanks. I need you to let go of my friends." Nie Tian's eyes darkened, and he said directly, "Don't worry. Your friends are in the place I arranged. They're 100% safe." Mu Qianlong looked calm and said, "As long as you let me know the secret, I will definitely let go of your friends. What if I can't establish a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment?" Nie Tian furrowed his brows and asked in a deep voice. The secret that Mu Qianlong wanted to know was in the Ring of Judgment, but Nie Tian had been unable to establish a bloodline imprint with the Ring of Judgment, which made him very worried. Could it be that there was really something wrong with his bloodline, so it was not recognized by the Ring of Judgment? Since the old thing chose you, there must be a reason. Mu Qianlong was quite confident, and he said with a faint smile, "The old thing is very hypocritical, but he still has a good eye for people." Nie Tian's face darkened, and he did not speak. "And you saved my life. Even if you can't help me, I will still let go of your friends." Mu Qianlong's mouth twitched, and he added, "I, Mu Qianlong, am not a good person, but I am not a villain who returns kindness with enmity. Chapter 4596. He was not a good person, but he was definitely not a villain. Mu Qianlon's words were very sincere, and yet Tian could not help but change his opinion of him. Moreover, Nye Tian was a little curious. Mu Qianlon had said more than once that he was not a good person. Although he did not show any obvious pain, he could hear the guilt in his words. What exactly did he do to have this kind of mentality? Since Mu Qianlon was unwilling to let them go, Nye Tian temporarily gave up. Moreover, the Fengtian sect was not safe now. It might not be a good thing to let Mo Rushi and the others out. Next, Mu Qianlon and Nye Tian exchanged some questions about martial arts and immortal Tao, and they both benefited from it. Not long after, Mu Jin returned with a corpse. This corpse was killed by the man in black. When I arrived, he was still breathing, but unfortunately, he did not survive. Mu Jin pointed at the corpse on the ground and said solemnly, "Very good." Mu Qianlon smiled, but his body was seriously injured, and he could not help but cough. "Are you seriously injured?" Mu Jin frowned and asked coldly. "I'm fine." Mu Qianlon smiled, but his expression was very ugly. "Don't move first." Mu Jin's eyes narrowed, and then she injected a stream of immortal energy into Mu Qianlon. Mu Qianlon did not refuse, and after a while, his expression slightly improved. "Your body." Mu Jin took a deep breath and seemed to notice something. Just as she was about to speak, she was interrupted by Mu Qianlon with a wave of his hand. "It's nothing." Mu Qianlon smiled faintly and did not look at Mu Jin's reaction. Instead, he took a step forward and stared at the corpse on the ground. Mu Jin did not know what Mu Qianlon was going to do, so she quietly watched from the side, not daring to disturb him. But then, a stream of immortal energy surged from Mu Qianlon's fingertips, condensed into an immortal energy blade, and directly fell on the corpse's neck. "What are you doing?" When Mu Jin saw this, his expression could not help but change as he shouted in a low voice, "Don't worry, it's just a corpse." As Mu Qianlon spoke, he cut off the head of the corpse and said, "Use his head to find the murderer. I think he won't mind." Mu Jin's eyes were gloomy. She was a little angry, but she still endured it. At this moment, Mu Qianlon held the head that was still dripping blood in one hand and drew an immortal talisman on the forehead with the other. A moment later, a strange scene occurred. The head seemed to have come to life and opened its eyes. When Mu Jin saw this, her eyes could not help but tremble. She could not hide the surprise in her eyes. Even though she was the noble Feng Tian spirit seed and had seen countless strange things, she couldn't help but be shocked at this moment. It seemed that this was the forbidden immortal technique that Mu Qianlon had cultivated in the past. Back then, Mu Qianlon was known as the #1 genius of Feng Tian spirit seed. At a young age, he reached the 5th stage of immortal supremacy and was secretly selected to be the next inquisitor. Unfortunately, Mu Qianlon cultivated the forbidden immortal technique on his own and was eventually expelled from the Fengtian sect. For a long time, Mu Jin could not understand why Mu Qianlon, who originally had a bright future, would cultivate the forbidden immortal technique. Until now, she still could not understand. Then, the immortal power in Mu Qianlon's palm surged and turned into an immortal power vortex in the air, lingering around the head. Instantly, images began to appear in the immortal power vortex. It was everything that the owner of the head saw before he died. Take a good look. What was the last image he saw? Mu Qianlon nodded and looked at Mu Jin. Mu Jin was very focused and stared at the immortal power vortex. Above the vortex, a group of people in black appeared. Their movements were extremely fast, like ghosts. They turned into several black rays in the void and then began a massacre. Did you see it clearly? When the image on the vortex disappeared, Mu Qianlon's face was slightly pale, and he asked, "I want to see it again." Mu Jin frowned and said coldly, "Okay." Using the forbidden technique obviously consumed a lot of Mu Qianlon's energy, but he still nodded. The second time, Mu Jin was more focused, but she still did not find anything unusual. She only saw a group of strange people in black killing a group of Fengtian sect disciples. But the group of people in black were all covered in black robes, so she could not see any valuable clues. Look again. Mu Jin's pretty face was gloomy, and she said again. Although Mu Qianlon's face was already very ugly, he nodded again. Then, Mu Jin looked at it 3 more times. At the last time, Mu Qianlon's face was pale, and he could not hold on any longer. Spirit seat, if you really can't see anything, just forget it. Tian could not stand it anymore and could not help but say. However, Mu Jin seemed to have discovered something. She fell into deep thought and did not speak for a long time. What did you find? Mu Qianlon could not help but ask when he saw that Mu Jin did not speak for a long time. The way the people in black killed was using an extremely evil iron chain. Mu Jin finally said, I noticed that there was an immortal talisman on the back of one of the men in black's palm. It seemed to be some kind of curse. Curse? Mu Qianlon frowned and asked, What kind of curse? Mu Jin's beautiful eyes trembled slightly, and she drew an extremely strange pattern on her palm. It looked like a coffin and was very evil. Mu Qianlon looked at the curse drawn by Mu Jin and seemed to think of something. He could not help but ponder. You know this curse? Mu Jin's expression changed, and she asked anxiously. Mu Qianlon did not speak and kept thinking. If I'm not wrong, this curse should be called the nether birth coffin. After a long time, Mu Qianlon finally said in a deep voice, Nether birth coffin? Mu Jin was puzzled and did not know what it was. The nether birth coffin is an extremely terrifying evil curse. Mu Qianlon's eyes narrowed, and he said, Those who are afflicted with the nether birth coffin will develop a talisman called the nether birth coffin in their bodies. Their souls will be imprisoned in the nether birth coffin, but they can maintain the actions of a normal person and only listen to the orders of the person who cast the curse. Moreover, the nether birth coffin can greatly increase the cultivation of the person afflicted with the curse, but the price is the annihilation of the person afflicted with the curse. More importantly, the nether birth coffin needs the soul of a child of 3 een as a guide to form the curse. Child of 3 een? Tian and Mu Jin were stunned and asked in unison. A child born on a een day in a een year cannot be older than 6 years old. Mu Qianlon frowned and explained. This, Tian couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air and was momentarily speechless. He did not expect the nether birth coffin to be so evil. Not only could it imprison a person's soul, but it also used the soul of a child as a guide. Such a heartless method showed how ruthless and cruel the person who cast the curse was. Why are you so familiar with the nether birth coffin? At this moment, Mu Jin's expression darkened and she asked in a cold tone. Mu Qianlon's pupils couldn't help but constrict. Even though he was trying his best to maintain his composure, he still couldn't conceal the panic in his heart. He composed himself and finally said, Because I once cultivated the nether birth coffin. Chapter 4597. Mu Qianlon had cultivated the nether birth coffin before? Tian and Mu Jin were stunned at the same time, and their expressions changed drastically. They had never imagined that Mu Qianlon had actually cultivated such a sinister, evil art like the nether birth coffin. Mu Qianlon's expression was gloomy, but he could not conceal the raging waves in his heart. The appearance of the nether birth coffin made him recall a past that he was unwilling to face in this life. Back then, in order to cultivate the nether birth coffin, he had killed hundreds of children of 3 een. Even though he was unwilling to recall these things later on, and even used a special method to seal his memories, he could not stop the nightmares that would suddenly appear every night. The miserable wails of those children before they died were like a curse that he couldn't get rid of, lingering around his ears like a sharp knife that kept cutting his heart. After a long time, Mu Jin finally spoke and asked in a deep voice, Why did you cultivate the nether birth coffin? The nether birth coffin used the children of 3 een as soul guides to imprison the souls of others. It could be said to be extremely devoid of humanity. She had long known that Mu Qianlon cultivated the immortal sex forbidden skill, but she did not expect him to cultivate such a cruel forbidden skill. I didn't want to mention these things, but I have to say it now. Suddenly, Mu Qianlon calmed down, and his gaze became indifferent. He said word by word, "I was instructed to cultivate all the forbidden skills." Instructed? Mu Jin's beautiful eyes trembled, and she shouted in a low voice, "Who?" "Our master, Sky Beacon Inquisitor Du Wui." Mu Qianlong suddenly raised his head, and his eyes were fierce and resentful as he said name. "Master Du Wui." Mu Qianlong's words were like thunder from the 9 heavens that exploded in Mu Jin's mind, causing her to tremble. She was stunned for a moment, and then she shouted in a low voice, "Impossible, you're lying." However, Mu Qianlong was extremely calm, and he even laughed strangely. "Do you still trust Du Wui so much at a time like this?" Mu Jin suddenly sensed the hatred in Mu Qianlong's eyes, and she was stunned and speechless. Could it be, as Mu Qianlong had said, that her most respected master had always been a hypocrite? "Why do you think I suddenly cultivated the forbidden skill?" Mu Qianlong's eyes were filled with killing intent. As if recalling many past events, he said, "I originally had a bright future, but because of a lie, I fell into the abyss. For so many years, I never explained anything even though I had to bear all the curses. I always remembered that he was my master because he was my Qianlong Tian. Time. He was the one who raised and taught me. Mu Qianlong Master, Qianlong Tian Wan." As he finished speaking, Mu Qianlong was almost howling, and his eyes had unknowingly become slightly moist. Mu Jin was dumbfounded, and her eyes were filled with disbelief. She could not believe that the usually calm and kind old man was the demon-like existence that Mu Qianlong had mentioned. Could it be that Du Wui had always been pretending? Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Mu Qianlong must be lying? A voice kept reminding her in her mind. But at the same time, another voice was clamoring. Why did he lie? Back then, what reason did he have to practice the forbidden skill? The two voices argued and refused to give in to each other. It almost made Mu Jin's brain explode. "I don't want to argue about the truth." Mu Qianlong was unusually calm. He waited for Mu Jin to calm down before saying, "I just want to tell you that the reappearance of the nether birth coffin reminded me of someone." "Who?" Mu Jin's eyes narrowed as she asked. "Genie Feng." Mu Qianlong said a name in a deep voice. Mu Jin's calm expression changed again when she heard this name. She was shocked. She was too familiar with this name. It was her eldest senior brother, Genie Feng, the first direct disciple of Sky Beacon Inquisitor Du Wui. He used to be the #1 person in the Fengtian sect and was known as the Wonder of Sky Beacon. Once upon a time, Mu Qianlong was known as the #1 genius in Sky Beacon, but his talent was nothing compared to Genie Feng's. Genie Feng was a 4th stage immortal lord before the age of 20, a 5th stage immortal venerable at 36, and a heaven stage immortal venerable before the age of 50. Not only was Genie Feng famous in the Fengtian sect, but he was also known as the #1 person in the entire immortal Qi continent in 1,000 years. Many senior immortals had asserted that Genie Feng would break the awkward situation of the immortal Qi continent, not having a 6th stage immortal venerable for thousands of years. He might even achieve this feat before the age of 100. Back then, Genie Feng's glory was unparalleled. At that time, Mu Qianlong and Mu Jin were only in their 20s. They were considered newcomers who had just stepped into the immortal sect and could only look up to Genie Feng. Genie Feng was a heaven stage immortal venerable at such a young age. His true battle strength had already surpassed the Fengtian Immortal and the 3 Sky Beacon Towers. At that time, the Fengtian Immortal had the intention to retire and wanted Genie Feng to be the next Fengtian Immortal. However, Genie Feng was very humble and thought that he was too young to bear the name of the Fengtian Immortal. When the Fengtian Immortal saw Genie Feng's insistence, he gave up and thought that it might not be a bad thing to wait for Genie Feng to grow older before taking over the Fengtian Immortal position. However, an accident happened that ruined Genie Feng's future and the Fengtian sect's hope. When Genie Feng was carrying out a secret mission, he was infected by evil energy and his temperament changed drastically. He became extremely violent and even killed many disciples of the Fengtian sect when he lost his mind. In the end, the Fengtian Immortal and the three sky beacon towers joined hands and killed Jin Yifeng. After Jin Yifeng's death, Mu Qianlong slowly emerged and gained the title of Sky Beacon Tower's #1 genius. Meanwhile, Mu Jin's expression couldn't help but change, and she was puzzled in her heart. Why would Mu Qianlong suddenly mention Jin Yifeng? She couldn't help but say with surprise, could it be that eldest senior brother was struck by the Netherbirth's coffin all those years ago? Jin Yifeng was infected by evil energy back then, causing his temperament to change drastically. It was as if he was a completely different person. Recalling all this, Mu Jin could not help but feel that Jin Yifeng seemed to be controlled by someone, which was why he suddenly became so violent. The Netherbirth coffin could imprison a person's soul and turn them into a walking corpse. No. Mu Qianlong shook his head and paused for a moment before taking a deep breath. Back then, Jin Yifeng's temperament changed drastically, and he was defeated by the Fengtian Immortal and the three sky beacon towers. However, he did not die after being defeated. Eldest senior brother did not die. Mu Jin's expression changed again. Impossible. After eldest senior brother was defeated, the Immortal Lord ordered his body to be burned in public. He can't still be alive. Jin Yifeng's body was indeed burned. However, before his body was burned, his soul was already extracted by someone using a special technique. Mu Qianlong's eyes narrowed slightly as he said in a deep voice, "This." Mu Jin immediately took a deep breath and was speechless for a moment.